Good morning, everyone. That's mute. Oh, perfect. So excited to call to order the California Practitioners Advisory Group. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're so happy to have you. And we're going to start with doing a salute to the flag. Would someone like to lead us?
Sure. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll give everyone a second to review the agenda. You'll see item 1, information, overview of the California Practitioner Advisory Group. And then we'll take item 5 after item 1 to approve the minutes. Item 2, California's Integrated Local, State, Federal Accountability and Continuous Improvement System, an overview. Then item 3, Local Control and Accountability Plan adoption and training update. Item 4, update on the continuing development work and revisions under consideration for the dashboard. And then item 6, general public comment. You have a copy of the minutes in your folder on the right-hand side. Stapled. Want to take a second to review the minutes? And then if anyone's ready to move to approve the minutes.
So Melanie, I think before that, I want to do the welcome and swear you in. Is that all right?
I was just jumping ahead like a crazy person. Absolutely.
Okay. Sarah, do you want to start?
And Lindsay Tornatori, Interim Director of the Improvement and Accountability Division.
And we are going to lead item 1, the California Practitioners Advisory Group orientation. And the first item that we are going to take up today is the administration of the oath of office for our new member, Melanie Green. And with that, I'm going to ask Board Member Strauss to administer the oath to Melanie.
So let me just say we are welcoming another member, Ron Anaya, but he had a family commitment this week, and so we did his oath separately. So anyway, Melanie, I am delighted to come up and welcome you and swear you in. So.
All right, congratulations, Melanie. As you have all noticed already, in addition to Melanie being appointed by the board at the November meeting, the board also recommended that she be appointed as chair for her term. And so thank you for leading us. And I know that Joanne has done a great job leading the committee for the past couple of years with Dr. Monsala's help. And so we're going to make this transition. I'm sure you're going to continue to be a resource to Melanie as she takes the lead now. So with that, we just want to do some welcomes. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to start.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome again. Again, Lindsay Tornatore, Interim Director of the Improvement and Accountability Division here at CDE. And I want to just thank all of you for taking time out of your very hectic schedules to be here, to serve our board, to serve our state in this capacity. And also, I would also like to take a few minutes and acknowledge and thank our CDE staff who work really hard behind the scenes to make sure all of the travel arrangements are set, that copies are made, everything is set up in the room, and most importantly, lunches are ordered and delivered. So can we please thank Patty Colvin, Kat Samita, and Aaron Gustin, who are back there. And on that note, quick housekeeping, please make sure you get your $11 to Aaron before 11 a.m. They're going to go over and get the lunches. Okay, so today, as you know, all of you will hear updates on topics that include the newly revised and adopted LCAP template and instructions, California State ESSA plan, and updates to the dashboard. Your feedback and discussion around these updates will contribute towards CDE's continuous improvement process in all of these areas. With my colleague Sarah Petrowski, we will spend some time orienting and refreshing all of you on some of the more technical and logistical aspects of being a CPAG member, which is what item 1 is. However, before we begin the business of the meeting and I pass the mic over, I just wanted to give a really quick CDE update. Last week, we celebrated the very first ever Innovating for Equity conference, which was held at the happiest place on earth. We had a lot of positive feedback, which we're optimistic is outside of the fact that it was at Disneyland, but the fact that it brought together all titles, multiple programs, and mirrors really how our students are served in the schools across different titles and multiple programs. And so we are already in conversation about how to keep this collaborative conversation and momentum moving. And we know at CDE that closing the achievement gap cannot and will not happen in isolation. It's going to be up to all of us, the adults in the system, to work together in an aligned and coherent manner in order to really disrupt those systemic inequities that are preventing our kids from reaching their fullest potentials. So with that, on the topic of closing the achievement gap, I also wanted to invite all of you to an event that our Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, is hosting next week, Tuesday, February 25th, here in this room. And it is a panel discussion with education leaders on efforts to support African American students. The event will include a historical perspective on the impact of desegregation on African American educators and students. Panelists will also discuss strategies to recruit and retain African American teachers. There is a link to register and attend via Zoom, and then of course in person. And so it's available on our webpage, but we can also send out the email to the CPAG listserv for all of you. So, all right, and with that, I'll turn it to Sarah.
I wanted to give Dr. Strauss a few minutes to welcome the committee.
So welcome everybody back, and particularly welcome to Melanie joining us. We've appreciated you and your support for this work and now in your work in the county, and delighted that you were willing to apply and be part of this commission. So we're delighted that you're taking on the leadership, and welcome everybody. So as you know, we're in the refinement of our accountability system, and those of you who are the practitioners have the experience of what this system means out in the field. How the data is reported, how your staff is using it, how you're working with local districts, all the different roles that you have. And we really depend on the state board on your perspectives in helping to improve this. So as you're out in schools and as you're working in the county and in districts, you really are our voice. And when we sit here, we are trying to refine some key points of the system that we have set in our work plan. So just so you know, this work is really important to us. It's important to the field, and this, before the item ever goes to the state board, it always comes to CPAG first, prior to the board meeting. So we vetted here. You help us think about things. So just so you know you have to take time out of your busy other commitments to come up here. It's not always so easy, but it matters to us. So I just wanted to thank you for your time today and for your voice and helping us address the items that we have on the agenda. Thank you.
Melanie?
Advisory group. For everyone else that I know or I'm excited to get to meet and know better, thank you for having me as a part of this group. Being a presenter, I know that your opinions are very helpful and you ask great questions that help us think through or help the board think through the decisions that they will make. So I just appreciate being a part of this group. And again, thank you, Ed and Joanne.
All right. So as you all have already noticed, you are in different seats than you were last time we met. I thought a new year, an opportunity to get to sit next to somebody different, see the boardroom from a different perspective. And so with that, we just wanted to take a couple of minutes to get to know one another.
Yes, and so we have a question for all of you to think about. How many steps did it take you to get here today? So just think about how many steps and however you want to interpret that. So I'll give you a minute. And when you're ready, go ahead and turn to your elbow partner, whoever's close to you, and share how many steps it took you to get here. Today.
Well, Lindsay.
Yes, how many steps did it take you, Sarah? Okay, so can we come back together? I won't do if you can hear my voice clap once, hear my voice clap twice. We won't do that. So let me ask you, CPAG members, how many steps did it take you to get here? How many of you said between 1 to 5 steps? 5 to 10? 10 to 15? 10 to 15? A little bit more, 10 to 20? Okay, how about 20 to 30? Oh, so 30 to 40? More than 50? More than 50 steps? Okay, yeah. So I think the point of this, when Sarah shared with me, it was about 7 or 8 steps. And then when I shared with Sarah, I said, at least 400 or 500, because I was looking at my actual steps that it took. And so I think the point of this exercise, too, is to remind ourselves we can think about and interpret a situation in the very minuscule details of every single individual step, or big picture as looking at things as an event as a step. And so as CPAG members, we're going to ask you sometimes to think about things in the very minuscule logistical details when you give us feedback of implementation in the field and how it's affecting where you are and your colleagues. And then sometimes we'll ask you to zoom out and think about things in a larger picture of a more of a larger event and steps. So Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, so we just want to start off talking about the roles and responsibilities. For many of you, this is going to be a refresher, but the State Board of Education has multiple advisory bodies. And as you can see here, these advisory bodies handle different topics to provide input to the board before they are making a decision on something. So for example, you can see there's the Instructional Quality Commission, which is handling curriculum and standards type issues. You here, California Practitioners Advisory Group, accountability focused. There's a Child Nutrition Advisory Council. I don't know if that one has met in quite some time, but I've seen old documentation from their existence. There's the Advisory Commission on Special Education, is related to special education issues, and then the Advisory Commission on Charter Schools, which previews charter before those are coming to the board. So this is all to say there's a lot of work that goes into everything that happens at the board meetings every other month. There are lots of other committees like yours that are meeting to help vet things and provide the guidance to the board so that the board meetings go smoother. And so just remember that you are a part of a very important big picture here that allows the state board to make decisions in an effective and informed manner. So here you see the purpose. This is taken from the CPAG website, the purpose of the California Practitioners Advisory Group. There's a couple of things here. The advisory group initially came out of ESSA. It was a requirement under ESSA that each state have a committee of practitioners to advise on accountability-related decisions. But as you know, here in California, with this last iteration of our accountability system, we have made an effort to really integrate our federal and state accountability to be one coherent system of continuous improvement and accountability. And so you all serve not only as advisory to the board on federal issues, but because everything with our state system is so intertwined with that, everything accountability related is coming here before it makes its way to the board, as Eileen mentioned in her welcoming comments. So I want to move into protocols and processes to just remind us of some of the things that we are responsible for here at CPAG. So first, I want to start off with an overview of bylaws, and then we are really lucky to have someone here from CDE Legal who knows Bagley-Keene far better than I would ever be able to explain it to you, to review Bagley-Keene and the requirements of that law for your roles as committee members. And Terry's here. Great. So I just want to first, in each of your folders, there is a copy of the bylaws. This was also something that was linked in the memo for this item. So it provides some basic information. This was adopted by the board when CPAG was formed in 2016. You can see there's some background information, the composition. The committee is really intended to serve as this community of practitioners. And so there are different roles that we are expected to have represented on CPAG to make sure we're getting that wide variety of opinions and perspectives. You can see there's also a summary of the purpose that we just went over, information about terms of office, frequency of meetings, governance, the applicability of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, and then travel and lodging. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of this. This is one of the things that governs our work here. And if you ever have any questions about any of this, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to answer any questions. Are there any questions about this at this moment? Okay. Well, then I'm going to turn it over to Terry to give you an overview of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. Would you like me to pass out the copies? That would be great.
So good morning. My name is Terry Oler. I'm an attorney here at the Department of Education. Been here going on about 14 years. And I guess I should caveat by saying I don't pretend to be an expert on Bagley-Keene, but I have dealt with it to some extent, and I certainly can provide you some basic information on the Act. So you're being handed a complete copy of Bagley-Keene in 12-point font. Try to get the ADA compliance there. And it's rather lengthy, as you can see. It's about 24 pages, I believe. A lot of it is probably not going to be that applicable to you. For example, I doubt there's going to be an occasion for you all to do many closed meetings, and that's a huge number of pages of the packet. But I did want to highlight a number of things in the packet. I don't know if it was Sarah or Lindsay indicated that you have already been provided, as I understand, a copy of the so-called Office of the Attorney General's handy guide to the Bagley-Keene Act. I don't know if you remember something like that. That's a nice little summary of the Act, and the legal treatise part of it, if you will, is the first 14 pages, and then from there is the Bagley-Keene Act. I could not determine for sure, but it looks like this publication is from about 2004. So basically all the laws there, you probably want to just forget about that and stick with what I've just given you just now. So every time there's a new member, supposedly they're supposed to get a copy of the Bagley-Keene Act. So something to remember as folks come in to the group. So the Bagley-Keene Act was enacted in about 1967. It's part of the government code. You've got the sections there. The basic intent is that meetings be open and that the public have an opportunity to participate. It can be frustrating because the model of Bagley-Keene is not necessarily one of efficiency. It's one of getting a broad scope of different folks that can give input and hopefully provide good ideas. And through discussion, deliberation, maybe some of those ideas get whittled down into the most sound, the most productive ideas. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, you are really advising the board, so the board is taking the heat on the main decisions that are being made. But obviously, you're fulfilling an important role in trying to bring ideas to the board and whittle down the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and in getting there. Another idea is that the process needs to be open so that the public can see what its government is doing and can have input. So it may not seem like it because you're a relatively intimate group here, but it is the case that the public would have the right to comment if they wanted to comment on a particular item. As you saw from the slides, in the bylaws itself, I gather the Board of Education has determined that the Bagley-Keene applies to you. Seems correct. It does appear to be a body that's created by statute. I haven't done that research directly with regard to this body, but that certainly does seem to be the case, and that decision's been made before my time. So the applicability of the Act is not just to the act of voting. It also applies to hearing, discussing, and deliberating. So in the handy guide, they talk about even study sessions or pre-meeting briefing sessions where a quorum or majority of the members are present would be a meeting. Conversations among the majority of members on an issue. Any aspect of the deliberative process involving majority of the members. Those will all be covered when you have to be thinking, whoa, am I running afoul of the Bagley-Keene by not having this as a public meeting? So bear with me, but I think I saw there's about 15 of you on the advisory committee. Is that right? Okay, so basically the magic number would be 8, right? As a majority, anytime you had 8, that would be a meeting. A trickier subpart of that idea is, to the extent you were to find that you wanted to comprise some kind of advisory body or some subgroup to your group. And special rules, that itself can become a state body. So I don't know if you'll have any occasion to get into that, but that's something to bear in mind, that if you have 3 or more folks on a subcommittee, that suddenly becomes a public body in itself. So it's sort of a derivative of the group. So I know we've got maybe more than one or more superintendents here and folks from school districts, so maybe the concept of serial meeting is known to you, but it is an important concept, and the idea of a serial meeting is that even though you may not have a majority of folks in a room talking, that it can become a public meeting by one person talking business with another person of the board, and then that person talking to another person of the board, of the group. And the handy guide talks about 2 different scenarios where that can be 2 examples. One is that I've just given. It's sort of the bouncing ball from one to another. The other example is that board member A, for example, communicates with board member B, and then separately communicates with board member C, if we assumed it was just a 5-member body. If you had 3 of those 5, then you'd be in the meeting situation, and that's bad news as far as possible Bagley-Keene violations. So a component of that you should be aware of is the danger of email, because you can get an email from staff perhaps, or maybe you even want to send an email to one of your fellow board persons, and as long as it stays within 2, we're going to be okay under Bagley-Keene. But let's suppose that conversation, there's some conversation, and then that gets forwarded to yet a 3rd person. Pretty soon, if you get up to 8, you've got a deliberation going on within an email string. So I guess one of the mantras I'd like to state here is beware of the reply all. Because you can very quickly find yourself in the middle of a deliberation type situation that would be in violation of Bagley-Keene. So in terms of some of the procedure, the meetings are supposed to be noticed 10 days before. There is supposed to be a specific agenda that has the items that are going to be covered at a given meeting. As you might imagine, if you're Joe or Jill, member of the public, you want to be able to rely on that agenda to know what's going to be discussed at the meeting. And if there are topics on there that, if there are topics that are discussed at the group meeting that are not on the agenda, then the public doesn't have the opportunity to be there to hear that discussion. So you cannot deliberate on an item that's not on the agenda. As I mentioned briefly before, you must allow for public comment on each agenda item. You can limit the amount of time per speaker. You can ask but not require that members of the public sign in. I'm just curious, do you ever have members of the public who show up? You do? Hey, there we go. Exhibit A. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, as I mentioned, the closed session portion is a long section of the Bagley-Keene. I think I'll not get into that too much right here. If there are questions of that is something you might want to carefully review and certainly ask for some help if you need some help interpreting something. So the public has important rights, as we've talked about to some extent. Let me just go through the litany of some of those rights. You have the right to attend, the right to notice, as we talked about through the agenda, There's accessibility issues in terms of ADA. They cannot be required to sign in. They have the right to record the meeting. They have the right to address the body. They have the right to criticize. And they have the right to the agenda or other relevant writings that are prepared or presented to the state body. And you are a state body. In terms of potential remedies for a violation of the Bagley-Keene, they can be quite serious. I guess the most serious, although it would take a fairly extreme finding of an intention to deprive the public of information, is actually possibly a misdemeanor criminal prosecution. Yikes, I want to stay away from that. Also, possibility of attorney's fees if there's some litigation. Possibility of an action taken by the committee as being voided. And of course, then there's the issue of the injury to the body's reputation and being challenged in a successful way. So some communications are okay outside the meeting. Items that would fall below the majority, as we talked about, as long as it's below the majority, that would be okay. But again, especially be careful about subcommittees, because even 3 members could trigger that as a problem. As a side note, I would note that the section dealing with that number 3, it appears there's a pending bill right now in the legislature that may want to knock that down to 2. So I'm not sure how that's going to be. Apparently some folks were not happy with how Governor Brown and the UC Regents president were communicating with each other on issues. And so there is some legislation on that. We'll have to wait and see what happens on that. You can have purely social conversations. You can attend a training event where you do not discuss issues within your jurisdiction. If you receive information on memos or agenda items, good idea to not communicate amongst yourselves outside of the public meeting. Again, being careful that you don't hit that magical number 8 figure. So I guess the main points that I want to just emphasize is watch out about doing anything when you don't have a majority, when you have a majority present. Be careful of the reply all in any email exchanges or emailing a number of members. That's just should send up a red flag. Stick to the agenda items. Don't stray off. That's going to deprive the public of the ability to participate and know what you all are doing. And try not to be frustrated with the process. You know, it's difficult to develop consensus, and this isn't necessarily meant to be the most efficient process, right? The legislature could have just said, X person shall make the decision, but that's not what the legislature did. And I could see from the membership that we've got a wide variety of folks that are going to offer lots of different perspectives. So unless you've got questions, that's about it. Any questions?
So sometimes it can be difficult to get here. I live in Southern California, and sometimes in the past, I've had a school board meeting on the night of our meeting here, and I really can't get back in time. So it does talk about attending meetings remotely, and I don't know if this is more a question for you or for someone to kind of tell us, is it possible for any of us to attend remotely?
I don't know what the policy is on that. You're absolutely right. There is a provision in Bagley-Keene that addresses the ability to call in. It's a little confusing because there's one section talking about telephonic meetings generally of the whole board, and then there's another section that more I think you're addressing, which is in the call-in procedure. So I'm not able to address what the policy is on that, but it's certainly possible.
So I can weigh in as a board member where I've attended board meetings virtually, and that's Brown Act, which is sort of the analog. We're required to post the public notice outside. So I've been in like my hotel room and I post the agenda outside, and I've even done these out of state. but I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I was going to say, maybe this is a question for the
So let me
state
just
board.
say, so we have that option. So let me just say, for instructional quality commission, sometimes it'll only be a remote call, and people have to do exactly what Jesse said. So you have to post it. We have to be notified before 10 days before. So your location. So I've been in hotels or at my son's house and had to put that address up because really anybody could come. So we don't normally, for these meetings, we don't normally do remote for state board meetings. But there have been occasions when we do. So if there's a need to do that, the staff that's managing it checks to make sure if you're unable to do that, but we don't always. So sometimes you just miss it. It just depends on the item, but we have that option.
So if that occurs, should we just contact staff ahead of time and say, does it feel like this is a meet? Because I realize sometimes we break out into small groups, and there's just no way that would work. But to be there for some of the items. All right, so
yeah, I think that's the best thing, Kimberly, is just to let staff know, is there a way to do it? And sometimes it's pretty easy to do. Depends on what as we post it, and then we've done it before, but not. Like, depends on what the situation is. But like I said, sometimes it'll just be remote, depends on, so.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. Good luck to you all.
Can I make one quick comment, Mr. Aller? In this day and age, there's also these social networking things. So we've been informed that, for the Brown Act, being Facebook friends is also a threat. And just one other point is, even if you're talking about something that's totally outside of any board business, there's the perception of that the public might have that you're talking about board business. So they've kind of kept us keenly afraid of any interaction amongst board members. So the Bagley-Keene actually sounds a little more mellow than the Brown Act, even though I know they're pretty much the same.
I actually haven't compared them in that regard, but you're absolutely right. I'm using the ancient idea of email communications, but you're absolutely right that the social media aspect of it would be the same concern. Board members communicating with each other through social media is the same idea. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for sitting through a primer on the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. I know it's not the most exciting thing, but it's a very important thing for all of us to remember as we do our work. The last thing in this process and procedures, I just want to remind everybody that one of the other requirements of your service as a CPAG member is completion of your ethics training and your FPPC Form 700. The ethics training happens every other year, and the FPPC Form 700 is due annually upon assuming office and upon departing office. And so I sent an email a few weeks ago, and I will continue to send those reminder emails until we get those. The deadline for the Form 700 from the FPPC is March 3rd. And so for those of you who have not completed that yet, I would really like to remind you to get that done in the next couple days. There is a penalty associated with not having that completed. And so I will send a reminder later today to those of you who have not received it yet. So please take a few minutes to complete your Form 700 because I would not want anyone to be subject to a financial penalty. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk about meeting materials, and we'll talk about travel.
Okay, so meeting materials, just some logistics. Agenda, again, as per Bagley-Keene, post at least 10 days prior to the meeting. CD has gone green, so we're trying to post everything online and reducing our paper products. And so you'll be able to find those. We've been sending out an email to the CPAG listserv so that everyone who's interested in the meetings knows that the agenda and all the items are posted. But of course, always feel free to reach out to office staff to the CPAG email if you have any questions or would like a printed hard copy. Of course, we ask that memos and slides are read ahead of the meeting so that you are prepared with your questions, especially in particular how they are affecting you in the field and the impact this could have, because of course that is the most valuable feedback that we really want to know about. And then as far as logistics, travel, lunch, agenda updates, again, you will all receive and have been receiving emails from the CPAG email address at CDE. There's a phone number associated with that. Erin is usually our main point of contact, but myself, I am always a contact, and then of course, Kat and Patty as well. And so with travel, Aaron's going to come up and he and I are going to kind of talk through a few of the forms and everything just together, because I know that when everybody goes back to the office, there are a ton of papers and different things. So we're going to take a few minutes this morning, just kind of go through the forms to make sure everybody has what they need so that all of you can get your reimbursements in a timely manner. For lunches, of course, you notice, for those of you that ordered, we changed it a little and we're asking for exact change. It just helps facilitate everything, so we really appreciate you guys doing that for us. And then, of course, with agenda and updates, just stay tuned to that email address. So any questions about logistics or? Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to invite Aaron Gustin to come up here. And Aaron has put together some travel forms for you in your folders. He's going to walk through. And I just kind of want to frame it, of course, that, you know, with travel, the biggest thing is, of course, is the bureaucracy, right? And so we unfortunately have to pass on the forms, pass on requests once we get them from you, and then it's out of our hands, and another office deals with all the logistics. So that's why we tend to ask for things a couple of weeks in advance. We just want to make sure that you guys get the flights that you want, or that your reimbursements are processed in a timely manner. And so Aaron is going to come up, and we're going to walk you through some of the forms.
All right, so the first form really pertains only to the new members, and that's the payee data record form. And so if you don't have that in your folder, it's because you don't need it. You've already completed it. And that essentially does is that it authorizes you to essentially be reimbursed or engage in a financial transaction with the state. So all state employees fill out these forms as well. And how you would fill out this form is you essentially, you don't have to fill out everything because it asks for, also businesses complete this exact same form. So if you're, looking for your, federal identification number, that's doesn't pertain to you unless you're, a corporation. So you would fill everything out as for the individual, and there's different sections within that. So.
Okay, so any questions about the payee data record? So we want to also, a quick caveat, we would love to collect these forms from you before you leave today too, so that way then we have them as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. So while we're kind of going through, if some of these forms don't pertain to you, feel free to start filling out others. Aaron, do you want to go back here and talk about?
Yeah, sorry. Okay. So I skipped it a little bit too. So there's also the travel profile authorization. That should be in all of your folders, and all the travel forms should be on the left-hand side of your packet. And the travel profile authorization, that is a new form that we're asking you all to fill out, and essentially this allows is a method that CDE uses to authorize you all to travel on CDE business and then also to be reimbursed. This will be a yearly form that we'll have to have you guys fill out, and we're hoping this expedites your reimbursement process, because before we were doing it on a one-time basis, which is a whole nother set of forms, and so we're hoping that this will get rid of a hurdle in the process of getting you all reimbursed. And then the last form that you guys will have is the AO 278 Consultant Services Travel Expense Reimbursement Request, and this should look very familiar. And that is the form that you will fill out in order to get reimbursed for your travel expenses. So we'll skip ahead to the AO 100, the travel profile authorization. You would be filling out the section for non-CD employees. There's a couple of sections that we already filled out for you. So like the payment, the index and PCA, that's like our account information. That should be pre-populated, but you will be focusing mainly on filling out your information as a non-CD employee, as an external consultant. And also, please leave the expiration of authorization section and the CD contact name and all that blank. We will fill that out for you. That's just internally, so if there's back and forth regarding your travel reimbursements, they know what we can control specifically who they reach out to within our team.
Any questions?
Any questions about this form?
So this form is for everyone.
Yeah, and this will be the one that we would like to get back from you before the end of today.
Okay.
So the next form is the consultant services travel expense reimbursement request form, and then again, this is the form that many of you guys fill out in order to get reimbursed. And I just wanted to go over it all again, just to help smooth some things out, because we have had some hiccups in the past, and then state travel policies change as well. So the first section is to fill out your your personal information, and then also the dates of service, and that would just be the dates that you're traveling. The one thing that we would recommend is if you fill out in their travel profile authorization form, if you fill out your work address on this form, please do your work address as well. If the addresses do not match, we will have to, that causes a hiccup with the accounting folks in processing your payments because the addresses don't match. And so please try and use one address. If that is an issue, we can always do multiple addresses, but then that's multiple forms. Any questions for that section? No? Okay. So there's part 2, and that is specifically regarding the transportation portion of your guys' expenses. If mainly the sections you'll be filling out for this will be the auto personal mileage, and then this is always a fun one because the mileage rates that you get, the reimbursement rates, seem to change on a yearly basis. So last year it was 58 cents per mile. The year before that it was 57.5 cents per mile, which made math fun. This year they decided to walk it back, and now it is back to being 57.5 cents per mile. And then one thing is, please remember, if you're claiming personal mileage, to always include your license plate for your vehicle. Another section in this would be if you use a taxi or a shuttle, or even like a ride-sharing service like Lyft or Uber, you would include that portion in here in this form as well. And then for taxis and ride sharing, you just would need to provide a receipt with your reimbursement request as well. Any question regarding this section? Okay. So the bottom section pertains to your travel dates, and this is where things can get a little confusing, because you'll see down in this section there's actually a transportation area. You will essentially put the same total amount for transportation up in part 2 down here again, and that's just kind of a cumulative total, so to add everything up for the, I guess, grand total. But one thing I'd like to stress is to keep track of your departure time frame and your return time frame, because a lot of times that can affect if you are eligible for a meal reimbursement. They will look at that specific time frame to determine whether or not your reimbursement is up with the policies and procedures. Any questions about this one? One last thing I would like to add is that our accounting folks consider this a financial document. So any form of correction tape or whiteout or filling it out in pencil are not accepted. So that can cause a delay if we have to ask you to fill it back out because there's whiteout.
Can you clarify where meals should be?
Yes, I'm sorry. So for meals, it's a little weird, but we call it the per diem as far as travel is concerned. And so if you're going to be requesting meal reimbursement, you would complete it in the per diem section. And if you have questions about any of like the meal reimbursements or mileage rates or even information regarding doing a taxi or a shuttle, we also provided this little document that is the Pocket Travel Guide. It is a great resource. It's like a one-stop shop with basic policies and procedures regarding traveling with the state. Any kind of technical questions that aren't answered in here, please reach out to the CPAG email about it, and we can try and answer your questions.
Okay.
And I just covered that. Next slide. And then this is the contact information for our CPAG team. I know you guys have all interacted with our emails, but then also you can reach me directly as well.
Okay. Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
Thank you. And so, as you know, our turnaround time for getting travel reimbursements, we'll process them as soon as and quickly as we get them. So we appreciate your patience with all of that too. Okay.
So as I was prepping for the meeting with Melanie, she had a great idea. One of the things we often provide you with as background ahead of the meeting are board items from the past. And I know when I started at the board, it took me a while to figure out what all the various sections of the board item meant and what purpose they served. So Melanie had the idea that she would walk you through a board item to help you familiarize yourselves with the various sections and how to interpret it as you are reading those as you prepare for a CPAG meeting. Or if you just want to be up to speed on every state board meeting and read through everything on our agenda. And so in your folders, you will see there is a part of an item. It was the January 2020 LCAP item from the state board meeting. And I'm going to turn it over to Melanie, and she's going to walk you through it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I will keep this brief because I know many of you have had extensive experience with board items. But one of the things we were talking about is really understanding that when you read through the first page of a board item, when you look through the subject and the summary, you might think, well, this information doesn't seem very new. This seems like information I've already heard before. Like, what's the new information that I should be digesting? And we were talking about how important it is to really think about the attachments at the end. And so oftentimes when you have a board item like this LCAP item, in the summary, you're going to hear background that might be familiar to you. As you keep going, the recommendation is going to be if there's any significant action that the state board is going to take. As we've talked about this morning, the California Practitioner Advisory Group is to provide advice, but we don't take any direct action on items. So this is really for the board when the board was looking at this board item. You'll see the brief history of issues, and sometimes that might sound familiar to the summary. So again, you're kind of looking for like, what's the new material? What do I need to digest? And again, you'll see the attachments. I think when you read through the item, oftentimes they'll introduce each attachment. And so sometimes highlighting where it introduces the item so that you then know what you're going to dive into. There might be one attachment you'll see in this LCAP item. There's 3. You'll also notice that the attachments are much longer than the board item. And so the board item is really just to set you up, in my opinion, for those attachments, where the new material often is, where the details are. So if we're thinking about the dashboard, when we're thinking about different options, you're going to get the numbers, the calculations, that type of framework in the attachment. So just kind of wanted to highlight you there because I know sometimes it's easy to get lost in that summary where you're like, where's our new material? But also knowing that this is a public facing document. And so this is really for anyone in the public that wants to pick up a board item, they can see where the board's been and where the board's going. So I think that's sometimes to keep in mind too. It's not necessarily written for us, but really for the public to pick up and see the story of where it's been and where the board's going next. So I'll keep that short. The state board is a great staff to ask questions. I'm sure you all have been using them as a resource. And that's my brief overview of an item.
Melanie, and as she said, if you ever have any questions about a board item, like items for CPAG, they are posted 10 days ahead of meetings, and you are always welcome to reach out and ask any questions. So I will turn it back over to the chair, and we can move on with board discussion or CPAG discussion and public comment.
Any discussion from the members? Okay, I will now open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment?
Good morning. I'm Liz Guillen. I'm the Director of Legislative and Community Affairs with Public Advocates. Public Advocates is a civil rights legal organization, and we work with community-based organizations, other advocates, to strengthen the voice of communities and families in public policy, particularly in education. I wanted to introduce my new colleague, Erin Apte, who's our newest legislative counsel. I'm introducing her to you all today so that she can get a feel for the important items that you consider before the board discusses them. I think that your work is so important because you're the community. You're on the ground. And in the same way that we work with organizers who work with parents and students, you work with your constituents as well. So we consider you organizers, sort of. I want to welcome you, Chair Green. It's nice to see you again. And I also want to extend an invitation to any of you to reach out to me or Erin at Public Advocates if we can help you, if we can support you in understanding our perspective on behalf of communities, parents, and students. Just as an example, Public Advocates and Families in Schools this month is having a Digital Action Month, digital action for public education. So our campaign is #WeMakeLCFFWork. And if you wanted to go on Twitter, you would find some of the activities. Also, if you would go on our website, publicadvocates.org, you could see how we're lifting up the voices, successes, and challenges of organizations on the ground all over the state who have used LCFF to get their schools better. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other public comment?
So sorry, I didn't realize my mic was on. I did actually, when thinking about this at home, wanted to make a query, I guess, if you will. So I know that our main purpose is to give feedback on items that are presented to us, to the state board for things that they're going to be considering. And, I'm thankful that they kind of look to us as practitioners who are out there on the ground. And so from time to time, during the time in between our meetings, I will read an article or have something happen in our district that feels pertinent to the work we do here. And so I guess I'm trying to understand better how this can not just be a one-way conversation where we show up and we have kind of presented topics, but that we can also bring kind of authentic feedback on items that might not end up on an agenda. And so if there's a way to help us also kind of bring that information and either submit questions or help maybe shape future agendas, if we can work out some kind of way for people to be able to kind of give that input as well. So it's not just us reacting when we come here, but also kind of helping bring issues forward, if you will. And, it's good to know that the agenda is posted 10 days in advance, and maybe that's why. So I just wasn't sure if there was kind of a very easy to understand for everyone, if you have a burning question or a burning issue that could be part of one of our future agendas, here's who you send it to, and here's the time frame, et cetera.
Thank you for that question. I think that you nailed it when thinking about how we're here to provide advice and feedback to the state board. So the state board really says, here's what we would like advice and feedback on. And I think I've seen how folks do an amazing job of bringing in your personal experiences as you give advice and feedback on items. I also think folks can think about the state board itself in providing letters and comments to the state board. I know the state board members are so receptive. They read every piece of letter, every piece of email that they get before each board item. So that might also be a place where folks can bring issues that they're experiencing in their work to the state board directly. And of course, you can always send any questions or ideas to state board staff. And as the state board brings us items to give feedback on, they can be incorporated as you give your feedback. I don't know if that directly answers your question, but that's kind of what comes to mind when you first ask it.
I'll just add to that too. One of the things that our board members have always directed us is that we are supposed to be accepting feedback on the work that we do on an ongoing basis. And this is not just staff at the state board, but this is also all of my colleagues at the California Department of Education. We really take seriously feedback from the field that we hear after the implementation of a decision at the state board. And so if things come up, whether it's something that's happening in Pasadena as you're working as a board member or something you read, you are always welcome to email us and let us know. This is something, if there is not a pending board action on that topic, that is going to impact whether or not we are going to be bringing it to CPAG. But we are always open to hearing that feedback and your thoughts on things and getting it to the appropriate people to make sure we're thinking through how this can become part of our long-term planning for improving our accountability system.
And I'll just add one thing too. It's about thinking about your role too. So all of you have many different roles. One of your roles is that you are a member of the CPAG committee, and then other roles, your superintendents, your district administrators, your leaders in the field. And so depending on what role you're playing is when different types of feedback and participation are appropriate. So again, like Melanie was saying, always as individual people outside of being CPAG committee members, you're always welcome to submit letters to the state board, to pose inquiries, and to give feedback. We appreciate that. And then as a CPAG member, we ask that you think about the different confines of Bagley-Keene and sort of how, in what ways we interact with one another and when we choose to bring feedback. And so that's kind of what you want to think about too, and just kind of manage which hat am I wearing right now and how is this affecting, because all input that you have is very valuable and it's very dynamic and complex because of your intertwined roles. But we just have to be careful when we're thinking about which role am I playing right now and what am I sharing.
Any other questions or discussion?
That is it for item 1. So now you can move to item 5. And
you saw me try to go to item 5 right in the beginning, right before I was even sworn in or anything. I was like, let's do 5. Okay, thank you, everyone, CD staff and state board staff for item 1. We're going to move into item 5, where we are approving the minutes. So on the right-hand side of your folder, you'll see a copy of the minutes from the October 24th meeting. Take a second to look over those minutes, and then I'll request a motion to approve. Motion to approve?
Yes, I'll move to approve the minutes from the October meeting.
Do I have a second?
A second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Could I? I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask a quick question. So this item, actually, I'll do it after the vote.
All those in favor? Sorry. Aye. Opposed? Okay, great. Minutes are approved. Questions?
So it says not limited to agenda items and approval of minutes, and I wasn't sure when it says agenda items, what it means on the subject of item 5. I wasn't sure if that meant. So we have something similar to this on our board agendas that says future. It says future agenda items. So it's an opportunity at the end of a meeting to weigh in on, did anything come up during the meeting that needed to be explored in the future. I don't know if that's what that means.
I think for this item, we're just approving the minutes from October 24th. We do have general public comment at the end, item 6.
Yeah,
Right. No, I'm just asking about the words where it says agenda items right before it says approval of minutes.
So that's not usually where that happens, Kimberly.
Okay.
Just so you know, I think Melanie's comments are correct on that, but when the public comments, if you have things that you wanted to share that we didn't cover during the agenda items, that'd be a good chance to, and there'll be time today to talk about that.
Well, I guess here's my request. If all we're doing is approving the minutes, why don't we put this agenda item at the top of the agenda? Because we always move it up anyway. So that's just a
Great feedback.
We typically do. I will just say that we wanted to start with the first item today because it included the oath of office for Melanie, and we wanted to make sure she was official before we started. But yes, generally we do try to keep this as the first thing.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay, we'll move on to item 2. Will be a general overview of California's integrated state, local, and federal accountability and continuous improvement system. You had access to the slides for this first part, and we have Cindy Kazanis from the Accountability Measurement, and I'm going to let you do your whole title, Cindy. I'll just introduce Cindy Kazanis. Thank you so much for the first general overview of our accountability system.
President Green. So are you seeing slides on your screen? Okay.
Yes.
And hopefully they will come up in just a minute. Cindy Kazanis, Director, Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. You're going to hear from my colleague Jenny Singh a little later. We just successfully, in the last 2 months, put out our technically our 4th iteration of the California School Dashboard, if you count the beta test we did back in March of 2017. It's been a while. We have a lot of great things, I think, going on with the dashboard. The first, I would say, overall is we're committed to continuous improvement. Today, we're going to take it from a high level, just so we're all on the same page. Obviously, you have at least 2 new members, one who's here today, but just to make sure that a refresher doesn't hurt. And there's new members in the audience, which, as we heard today, at least one. So happy to respond to any questions, but for some of you, this may be a little bit more elementary than you're used to from myself and staff that helped prepare this. So we'll cover the dashboard itself and the purpose and how we got to where we are today. I'm going to take you through a live demonstration of the dashboard where I'm going to talk about state level results at that time, and we can talk about what we're seeing sort of trend-wise statewide. And then we're going to talk a little bit about resources that we have available to support the dashboard. So we've been out, of course, over the last couple of years doing our roadshow about what the dashboard is. Last week, Jenny and I did this presentation, and Jonathan Eisler, who's in the audience as well from my staff, did this presentation at the California Innovating for Equity Summit, which the California Department of Education hosted. It was previously our Title I and our Title III conference, which was combined. We had really strong attendance at those. In one session, there were people sitting on the floor. So for me, that's a good sign that maybe you're in the wrong room. You didn't get a big enough room, but that there's really a thirst for knowledge on what is the dashboard, why we do the things the way that we do. So the slide that I'm starting with, I think, is really important because it's a good reminder that we don't do the dashboard just because we feel like putting out a bunch of results. We're actually required by state and federal law to have something to demonstrate how our schools and our districts are doing. And in state law, it really does talk about the need to use specific indicators, which are dictated under education code, to identify strengths, weaknesses, and areas of improvement. So it just sort of gives you an overview that you may have areas of improvement. It doesn't tell you what caused those things, right? And that's where the local control and accountability plan comes in. So we have this purpose, actually, there's a whole little short mission statement on the dashboard homepage. So if you ever get sort of hung up on why do we have this thing, talking to parents, this is always a good place to start. We are, I think, unique from other states in which we're looking at 13 different student groups. So not only are we looking at our racial and ethnic groups, but again, our program student groups. We're definitely leading the nation on our foster youth. I have a position totally dedicated to foster youth. Our consultant is a rock star. She keeps getting invited to more conferences, and so we're really excited that we're able to shine a light on one of our most neediest groups. And then we are committed to continuous improvement. So you all have provided feedback over the last couple years since you've been organized, but we also get, by going out in the field, we're getting comments all the time about, why don't you do this? Or why does this happen? And so Jenny and her staff and others are constantly responding to those kinds of emails. And we're keeping in contact with our colleagues at the county level through associations such as CSESA, through districts, through AXA, and then, of course, the department hosts our own policy work groups, as well as our technical design group, of which member Levine is a member. With all that, just again, quick overview. We do have state indicators and we have local indicators. Of course, we have 6 state indicators because we consider our academic indicator to be a combined, so our math and English language arts is considered one indicator. We are let's see how I put this. It's the quality of the data for our state indicators is determined based on what the quality of data we're getting from our local educational agencies. If you tell us that you only had 15 students complete A through G, that's what we're going to put out, not only on the dashboard, but on our DataQuest site. And so it's imperative that if you are a superintendent, no need to pick on our couple of superintendents here, that we support our data, good, healthy data practices, because I cannot, I don't have a way to say, oh, we should have expected to have 2,000 graduates and you only gave us a handful. And so when that call comes in November, it's sometimes too late for us to make changes to the system. That said, we do have a very lengthy private preview for those very tough conversations. And sometimes we're able to make changes, but we are now in a place where we are getting very increasing demands on getting the dashboard out earlier. We've not been able to do that, but I think that kind of momentum will only increase from the field to say, we wish you could release the dashboard in September. Well, that means you need to give us data, I don't know, July, June, who knows? But the demand, I think, will continue. So the more that we focus on data quality throughout the year, the better we will get a dashboard that is reflective of what is actually going on in our schools and districts. And I don't want to overstate this. We do have very good data submission practices. We have a very healthy and robust data system in which we have quality checks that say, did you really mean to tell us that you had a couple of suspensions and then you had 100% attendance? Like, that doesn't make sense. So we are able to make those kinds of checks in the system, but I always like to talk about the fact that we need to support, of course, making sure that the data comes in healthy. So based on the information we pull out of CalPads and from our testing vendors, we go through a series of processes to make sure that we've applied the appropriate business rules, we've applied the appropriate policy measures that the State Board of Education has asked us to do. And we're parallel processing everything, and so it's going through several staff to get to the iteration that you see. So my division is about 40 people. A majority of those people are working on some aspect of the data, whether it's preparing the data to go through our accountability processes, or preparing that accountability process to show up on a differentiated assistance list, because that is a very complex calculation as well. So we load that up to the dashboard. Now keep in mind that the dashboard is supported by San Joaquin County Office of Education. It's a line item in the state budget, and so we've had that healthy relationship with that county office for a long time, and it goes back to when the school accountability report card was put online. And so they actually support that application as well, and they're getting ready to support the e-template for the local control and accountability plan. Now, when we switch over to local indicators, of course, that is local information that is wholly owned by the district or the charter school, of course, is considered a district. So that information is collected and reported by LEAs. They upload that to the dashboard. There is a secure login, and they have an opportunity to review that information. They're asked a couple of questions about when did you take this to your board for consideration, and so on. And so there are 5 local indicators that all schools must and districts must complete, and then county offices have an additional 2 indicators. We make all of this data available through research files on our website. So if you ever wanted to look at a particular local indicator to see how folks responded, you can actually look through the indicators individually, and you'll be able to see the results for the entire state of California. So how do we use the data? Well, of course, the law indicates that the data must be used when districts and schools, charter schools, are writing their local control and accountability plans. It talks about the dashboard data. We also have schools use that to develop their school plan for student achievement, or their SIPSA. So schools that are eligible for support, though, under the Every Student Succeeds Act, have to use their data to inform the SIPSA. So there's a little bit of a nudge, more of a nudge there. And then we, of course, use this data to identify and post a list of eligible districts for differentiated assistance. This last year, we identified for the first time charter schools as well. And then, of course, we have to use that to inform our school support under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So all of this data goes into those identification processes. And, of course, with the final goal of improving student outcomes. So for local indicators, I mentioned there's 5. Of course, the Williams piece, which we call the basics, looking at teacher qualifications, instructional materials and facilities, implementation of state standards, parent and family engagement, local climate survey, and then access to a broad course of study. Of course, the county offices have the 2 that are related to expelled pupils and then foster youth. So our dashboard coordinators are important people at the district and charter school level as well. And every year we have a practice in which we refresh that list. So as a superintendent, you are getting an email saying, please designate this person. That is a practice that we've incorporated that's based on what we do for our assessment coordinators to make sure that we have a fresh person, because we do see a turnover in that assignment. We also really depend on that group to get out information about things that are coming up on the dashboard, whether it may be the private preview or something else that's related that we want to make sure that they're aware of. So that has become a very important list to communicate to as well. So we, of course, have ratings for local indicators, and that is done by the local educational agency. So it is actually automatically populated in the dashboard. So if you've submitted the information, you've met the criteria. If you did not submit the information, then we automatically will mark you as not met. And then if you didn't submit it for 2 years or more, the system will find that you've not met it for more than 2 years. And in fact, in 2018, we had 11 districts identified under local indicators not met for more than 2 years. So it is used for our differentiated assistance processes specifically. And then we also want to make sure that LEAs are meeting the requirements, which of course there's a 3-prong approach. They're annually measuring progress on the performance indicators. They're reporting those results at a regularly scheduled public meeting, and those results are reported through the dashboard. So that is the standard for meeting the requirement. For state indicators, we have the 6 that we've talked about in past meetings, but I'll walk through them in a very short period. So the chronic absenteeism indicator, of course, only covers grades K through 8. And keep in mind, the grade span is important because of making sure we have a balance of indicators between school types. So we want to make sure that we have an equal number of indicators for our high schools and our elementary schools because that is what's required under ESSA. So this was negotiated as part of the adoption of the state plan and approval by the U.S. Department of Education. We The state suspension rate indicator is the one that spans the entire student population from grades K to 12. Graduation rate indicator, of course, is only a high school indicator, but we consider that to be also a leverage point to show if you're not attending school, you're most likely not going to be graduating. So it's sort of a proxy for chronic absenteeism for our high school grade spans. And then the college career indicator is, of course, another high school indicator. And then the academic indicator, grades 3 through 8 and 11. Of course, we added grade 11 at the insistence of the U.S. Department of Education back in 2018. And then finally, the English Learner Progress Indicator, it covers grade spans 1 through 12. And in 2018, we did not report that. We only reported the actual results because we moved into a new assessment. And we reported for the first time in 2019 status. And of course, we don't include kindergarten in that grade span because we need a matched record for 2 years to create status. So they get there eventually after their first year enrolled, but that is the English Learner Progress Indicator. And then, of course, we have a methodology in which we're looking at 2 years of data to status and change to receive a performance color or level. So status is the current year data. So for this past year, it would have been 2018-19 data, and then we're looking at the difference between 2018-19 versus 2017-18 data. We have some end-size requirements, and this is, again, in our SSD plan, so it is something that we had to address in the plan, and we use 30 students. There are other states that use much smaller iterations, but this is what our technical design group felt comfortable with and thought that that would be technically valid in our, so that is consistent throughout. There is an exception when we get to the district level, so education code requires us to look at 15 students for purposes at the district level for 2 student populations, homeless and then our foster youth. And when we look at how we treat charter schools on the dashboard for the end size, we always look at them as schools for this purpose because otherwise we will not be consistent with ESSA. So we want to make sure that we're using that end size of 30 throughout. So charter schools are treated as schools for that purpose. So, of course, we moved to a dial for our colors. We got away from those pies after the first year. It was a little painful, but this has been, I think, well received. It's very intuitive to show that, of course, red being the lowest and blue being the highest. This has been something that we've now had for 2 years. In looking at how we get a color, we, of course, are looking at status, which would be the column on the left-hand side, and then at the top is what was your change from the prior year. So this is a very traditional-looking chart for the 5x5 grid is what we call it. We look how did you do in the current year. So in this example, we have they were a high, and the difference from the prior years, they increased. So this would be a good example for something like our assessments. They were scoring high on the assessments already, and are they showing progress? So we give credit for progress. We don't get credit for, usually not for maintained, but definitely not for declined. So that is something that the system is designed to show is encouraging continuous improvement. And then another thing that we've looked at over the last couple of years is looking at our small student populations. So I think sometimes we think about our smalls, but also thinking about if you have fewer than 150 students in your graduating class of, for example, that is something that, again, our technical design group found that 149 or fewer was a good threshold to use, and so the State Board of Education has adopted this for several of the indicators. This also came through a policy work group that we did with our Small Schools Association. They were very helpful in getting us to a place, and one of the other iterations of this data simulation, I think, was at 250, and so the 149 or fewer was what we landed on. That is looking at a condensed size for at least for, we'll see it in the next chart over, but the indicators that we've applied for this and that the state board has adopted is for the graduation rate, suspension rate, chronic absenteeism rate, and the college career indicator. So you can see on this slide really what the construct of that, each of those iterations are, because the graduation rate, of course, is only looking at the graduating class, whereas suspension rate is any students who were enrolled at any time during the school year for that particular school or district. Chronic absenteeism, there's an eligibility requirement for enrollment, and so each of them have a little bit of a different twist. But what it gets to in the end is a more fair, a fair product or a fair evaluation for our small schools or our small populations. What we do for the 3x5 is we remove the extreme sides of the 5x5 grid. So we no longer have it increase significantly, and we take out decline significantly. And that seems to have really stabilized for those schools that have smaller populations, the accountability system. So when they say, well, this whole family moved out, and maybe there were 6 kids in the family, and or they moved in rather, and they all got suspended, you know, so those kinds of stories I think we've really tried to address with this accommodation. The other group that we've looked at in a different manner that I know that you've all weighed in on over the past couple of years is our alternative schools. And this piece is actually articulated in Education Code as well. So what we have is called the Dashboard Alternative School Status. And for those of you that know alternative schools well, we call this DAS. And DAS schools have been on the dashboard since 2018. When we originally designed the dashboard, we were taking a slow approach to make sure we got it right. We have had, over the past couple of years, a relationship with Stanford University, with the Gardner Center. And in creating that task force, we actually just met yesterday with a small group for most of the day, and Diane's been a member of that, so we've been appreciative. She's always got good feedback on how to make sure that we're creating a dashboard and an accountability system that's also fair for alternative schools. And of course, that represents over 10% of our population. A lot of concentration of these students are at our county offices of education, so we want to make sure that we're meeting the population where they're at. So we include, again, data for our DAS schools in not only LA level reports, but they also receive their own school reports. We do keep in mind that for charter schools, they're treated as an LEA, so they are never seen in their authorizers piece. So if we're looking at Sac City, we would see different enrollment numbers than we may be used to seeing, because every single charter is excluded, regardless of funding type. And then county offices of education that only serve our DAS schools, that information has been rolled up to the county office. We are moving away from that this coming year, but that is something that has been a tradition for the last several dashboards. So the time that we've spent with our DAS task force and the alternative schools task force has been around how do we make sure that we're meeting our student populations where they're at. And so we do hold our alternative schools accountable for all the state indicators, but the board has allowed us to bring forward recommendations for modified methods. So there's a couple of different ways that we've looked at this. Modified graduation rate, as well as this past year the board adopted a modified status level cut scores for the academic indicator. So I'm happy to pause for questions before I navigate to the dashboard. I know that was a lot, but I think it's a good refresher if there's anything that came up that you want to learn more about.
I don't know if I missed the October meeting. I don't know if this was covered about the moving of the local indicator reporting happening now in the spring rather than in the fall. And I guess I just wanted to offer a comment because it allowed us for our local indicators, especially things where we were giving surveys or waiting for the CHIC surveys to come back or parent surveys around parent engagement. It allowed us time to do that and have something to actually report in the fall to then go up to the dashboard. So now, since that has to come to the board and I believe be submitted to the state in the spring, we'll either be using partial data or have to say, well, here's last year's data because we haven't done this year's compilation yet. So I just wanted to reflect. So the dashboard will still come out in December, but it will have the information that we gathered in April or May, and so there's a gap there. And I realized that someone put that in Ed Code, and I assume it was the state legislature and not the the CDE or the State Board of Ed, but however we give feedback, I think that is going to cause us to have less up-to-date information.
So, as Kimberly said, yes, this was a change that was made by the legislature in last year's budget. And the intent behind the change is that the data collected with local indicators is supposed to inform LCAP development. And so by shifting the deadline for local indicators to be presented to local school boards, that kind of moves the timeline up in our LEAs so that that data can be collected in a timely way to influence the development of the LCAP in the spring. We're not going to change when it is required to be input into the dashboard. We're thinking about potentially opening the window for inputting the data earlier, because if it is collected and presented by June 30th, if a LEA wants to just take it off of their plate and put it into the dashboard so it will be there for the December release, we're thinking through some of those changes. But yeah, the change came from the legislature. The board had to approve it at the January 2020 meeting. But it is really just a reflection of how can districts work to change their timelines for collecting local indicator data so that information is there as LCAPs are being developed every year.
But it does put us out of sync with all the rest of the information in the dashboard. So the dashboard in December has the prior year's data. Now, unless we really try and get it ahead of time, it will be missing some of that. Do you see what I mean? Because if we're trying to collect it in April, or, I mean, since our draft should be ready in April or May, I mean, really we're going to collect it in December. So I guess what I'm saying, it was actually really good the way it was, and this kind of makes us use old data. So
the data then is, the state data is being collected in the school year, and you would be collecting your local indicator data within that same school year to then be reported on the dashboard. So the two indicator elements would then all be coming from the same year if your LEA was choosing to collect your data in the next school year,
right,
previously. Okay.
Any other questions?
So my question is about, I was very excited that last year a new self-reflection tool for family engagement was adopted. And my question is on how often are the local indicators reviewed? Because I'm interested in learning what was gathered from last fall, what's going to be gathered from this spring to see how the tool is working.
So they'll be reported out every time the dashboard is released.
Is there an analysis or an assessment to?
There is no unlike the state indicators where we provide a performance levels, the performance level that is adopted or the measure that is adopted for rating is not met for 2 or more years. So that is the extent of the analysis. But as I mentioned earlier, the data is available for the public to review and to do a more comprehensive analysis, especially if you have a discrete interest in one of the local indicators. The data is actually grouped by indicator as opposed to clumping them all together.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are you pulling up the next slides?
No, I'm pulling up the dashboard.
Okay.
I didn't load this ahead of time, so let's make sure it works. All right, we're live, I believe. Okay, so with the California School Dashboard for the 2019 release, we were able to, through the state budget, there was additional funds appropriated to allow for additional translations of the dashboard. So first, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of those. We now have beyond Spanish, which the 2018 dashboard was translated into. We've added Tagali, we've added Vietnamese, and we've added Mandarin. So at any point on the website or on the mobile app, which of course has been live for about a year now, so if you haven't downloaded the California School Dashboard mobile app, get it from where you get your apps today. It is free. So these are available wherever you're at on the dashboard. You can go in and you can translate the page that you're on, or you can just keep it as a default into the language of choice. These are the next, these languages that we added on the statewide level is really the next languages that are spoken by our parents who are not speaking a language other than English. So of course, Spanish is the majority of our parent population, but then we move into really the Asian languages. And so we've been really excited to bring those on board. Beyond that, a lot of the structure that you're familiar with from the 2018 dashboard still is there. I'm going to move over to the state summary to show you how we did this year. So as a state, for chronic absenteeism, we're an orange, suspension rate a yellow, English learner progress, it says no color, but we'll get there. And then graduation rate, still doing quite strong on that, a green, college and career indicator a yellow, English language arts a green, and then mathematics an orange. So if I wanted to look at any of these indicators, I can simply click on the box and it'll take me down to the baseball card. Keep in mind that the state of California does not submit local indicators about itself, so you will never see the local indicators on the state performance, but we can go to a local charter school or a district and look at that information. So for chronic absenteeism, as an example, actually let's go up to our student population. So we are still pretty steady with our enrollment over 6 million students, 6.1 million students. Again, majority of our students are continuing to be economically disadvantaged. Our English learner population continues to have a slight decrease. We're under 20%, and then our foster youth at 0.5%. At any of these junctures, you can learn more information. If we wanted to pull up the disaggregated information for the state, we can do that by viewing more information. So this information is also disaggregated by ethnicity, by grade, by any combination you would want practically on the DataQuest website, which my division also is responsible for. So the baseball cards, of course, provide some additional information. We can get into where we're at as a state on each of these. So at a glance, for example, for English language arts, we can see that we are 3 points below standard, but that does put us at a green. And over the prior year, we've actually increased slightly overall as a state on this assessment. More importantly, I think, is to make sure that we're cognizant of the equity report for each of these baseball cards. So while as a state we're at green, we only have 2 student groups in that population, or 2 student groups that meet that criteria, and then 2 that are above that in the blue. So the majority of our student groups are actually performing less than we are overall. That's really the depth of knowledge that's in the dashboard, is to get into that, view more details. So we'll move into that for a different indicator, but I just want to make sure that we focus on that as well. I think also very exciting this year is we were able to onboard status for the English Learner Progress Indicator. The State Board of Education had some very good discussions about the display, how to make this parent-friendly, because this is a transition year. So you will not see this baseball card look like this in any other year. So for this 1 year only, what we're trying to do is demonstrate how our student population is doing just on the assessment, not actually showing, providing a performance level, because we need that additional year of data. So of the 844,000 students who are designated English learners, again, this has some exclusions. We talked about kindergarten being one of them. We needed to match records. So there are some students that may be new. They only have 1 year of data. So we do have a pretty high percentage of matched records. But from the 1.1 million students that took the test, we do see 844,000 represented. We have 48.3% making progress, so that puts us in the medium for this indicator. And then we'll also go into view more details in just a bit on this particular indicator. For college career, we're making progress. We still have a lot more work to do at 44.1%. But again, you can see the depth of the results in the student group details right here on the equity report. For academic engagement, this was the one indicator where we did see a decrease. So a decrease meaning we had increased absenteeism rates. And for majority of our student groups, I think the superintendent we've actually talked about this with outside entities about the need to focus on getting our students to school, because if they're not coming to school, they're not given an opportunity to learn, which means they're not getting an opportunity to show probably progress through something like our English language arts and our mathematics assessments. On the bright side, we are seeing our students graduate on a more on-time basis. So almost 86% of our students are graduating within the time frame that has been adopted. And of course, this year we brought in the 5th-year graduation rate for traditional schools. And our suspension rate, which is one of our really the longest sets of data that we have at the state level longitudinally, we've been collecting this since 2011. We have seen a steady decline of suspension rates since we've put this data out publicly at the school and district level and by student group. So that is something that we see is low. There are, of course, student populations where it is much higher, and there are certain areas of the state in which this is definitely a focus for schools and for districts. So I told you I wanted to go into one or two of the indicators. I'm going to start with our English Learner Progress Indicator. And I have to tell you, this graphic that you see here probably went through like a dozen iterations. We spent a lot of time with our policy work group and then also with, I think you all, I believe Jonathan was up here last year. Yes, he's nodding. Jonathan Isert giving you an iteration of this that you also commented on. So this is the joy of making something that is hopefully legible for the public and easy to understand. So what we're trying to show here with this diagram is while the English Learner Proficiency Assessment, or the LPAC, it has 4 levels, we've actually disaggregated or made 2 additional levels for the English Learner Progress Indicator. And when we brought this to you last year, we talked about the need to, there's a clumping of scores and students in those middle groups, and we want to make sure that we're able to show progress. So we've added those additional levels, which of course the state board adopted this last year. This is consistent with what we did under the prior assessment for the CELT. And so as a result, I think we are making good progress for students, again, acquiring mastery of the English language or proficiency. So we also provide additional information when we get into view more results for different indicators. So for the English Learner Progress Indicator, we are able to show the amount of students who progressed at least 1 level on the English Learner on the indicator. So at least one of those 6 levels, we're at 43%. Those that maintained level 4, which is of course where we want our students to get to. And then those who maintained at the lower levels is 31%. And then finally those who decreased, which is really not what we want to see, is 20%. So it just gives a stronger insight into the data set. Keep in mind that this indicator does not include, as it did in 2017, students who were reclassified. That is something that, or rather, not students who were reclassified, our long-term English learners. We had tried to do additional credit. This is a waiver that we applied to the U.S. Department of Education to allow us to include. They denied that waiver after a lengthy process. We went back to Washington, D.C. to try to change their mind, and were unsuccessful. So this is purely students who were English learners in the 2019 school year. Reversely, if we go back to English language arts to provide you a little bit more context, for each of the other indicators, you will see a breakout of the student groups. So a little bit more insight into the data. So at a very high level, we can see who's doing really well, our Asian and our Filipino student groups, and where we need to see improvements moving forward. If we look down at our orange student groups, so that would be American Indian, English learners, foster youth, Pacific Islander, and students with disabilities. And then the other student groups you see fall into yellow and green. But I think really where the breadth of the data is when you get into each of those cards. So how many students, for example, are in the American Indian student group at the state level? How are they doing compared to foster youth or others in that orange? And there's really a depth of performance, right? We can see for American Indians at 34.6 points below standard, but our foster youth are at 72 points. Now our students with disabilities are doing even more, they're having more difficulties in showing progress at 88.3% below standard. You can also see the amount of students that make up that population. So I think that there's just a lot of interesting insight into the data when you get into these reports as well. The assessment indicators include additional reports, so you can see really trends over the last 3 years about how we're doing. So it's been pretty level over the last 3 administrations of this assessment. But then we also get into our English learners, because of course this indicator includes students who've been reclassified for up to 4 years. So we can see as a whole how our current English learners were doing, how our reclassified English learners are doing, and how our English-only students are doing. And at some schools and some districts, you actually see our reclassified English learners outperforming our English-only students. So it really a very strong student group in some pockets, but you can see that they're really holding steady here. So with that, I wanted to pause for any questions, and then I wanted to take us into some additional reports. Okay.
In terms of the LP,
Mhm.
when I know that scores were set, and a lot of the advocacy community thought that the current scores are a little low. And so my question is, again, when do you revisit again the issue of scores? Because part of what we want to make sure is that, you know, if they're low, then we're expecting that not a lot of students are going to be receiving the support that they need.
Scores by
The cut scores.
the cut scores. Okay. So the distribution of the cut scores was set based on the methodology we used for all the other indicators. And so we do see in the very low and the very high, a very even distribution. That was based on actual data. So the cut scores that the board adopted do show that that played out. You know, I think that there are pockets in the state where folks thought that there would be students that were considered English learners to do not as well. We have committed to bringing the cut scores back in November when we bring back the adoption for change. So we'll see the status cut scores and the change cut scores come forward for consideration to the state board, and if there's a need to make adjustments, we would make adjustments then. But I think, you know, overall what we are seeing are, and you can see by the data that I just showed you, English learners are making progress. And there's a very small percentage of them that are actually going backwards, but the majority of our English learners continue to make progress on learning the English language, which I think is a testament to the strong program that we've put in place over the last couple of years or decades in the state of California, and the commitment to English learners. So if anything, I think it's a testament to the work that folks are doing in the field.
Just continuing on that conversation, one of the things we asked for earlier in the year, which didn't happen, but perhaps it can happen next November, is if for us as a group that's supposed to be advising the state board, it's really important that just like we've seen all the data and the cut score for all the other indicators, that we also see it for the English learner LP.
Oh, you did that. We did bring that forward to you this last fall. Part of the October CPAG meeting.
The information was brought forward, but not the actual cut scores and percentiles. So just asking for the complete report. Thank you.
Okay, we can take a look at it, but you definitely received the full breadth of information. Great. Well, now I'm going to I want to use a local context. I'm not going to pick on my favorite Sacramento City Unified School District since the superintendent is here. We'll go to Natomas Unified to step the way to give you a breather. All right. So one of the reasons I want to bring up a district is because I want to be able to show you how we look at our local indicators, but I also want to go into our view additional reports. So Natomas Unified, just to give you a little bit of context, is a small to medium-sized district with over 10,000 students. Again, very reflective of the state population of socioeconomically disadvantaged, a little less English learners, and on par for the foster youth group. They have provided an optional narrative, so you see that in the purple box here. If that information is not included, you would not see the purple box pop up on here. But each of the indicators are met, so they've completed the information. If you wanted to get into view more details on any of them, you would simply click on the tile and it would take you down to where it is on this front page. And for example, for parent and family engagement, we can look at view more details. And from here, we would actually be able to see the rubric that they responded to and whether or not they had
for example, for basics, this is for teachers' assignments, whether or not they had any misassigned teachers of English learners and so on. So that information is all in here. When we're looking at a district or a school, we can go at any point on the state indicator side and compare it to the state by simply clicking that button. So we can toggle back and forth there. But where I wanted to take you and spend just a little bit more time to show you a couple of new features is in our View Additional Reports, which you can access on the homepage of each of our schools and districts. And what we have expanded on this year compared to last year or prior years is we've added in district performance by county and charter performance by county. The other reports have been in existence. We did overhaul the College Career Measures report. But first I'll go into the district performance by county because I think it's a great tool for our county offices of education to really see at a glance how their complement of districts are doing on each of the state indicators. These columns are all sortable. You can see, if your neighbor is maybe doing better than you are, or if you're doing better than your neighbor, if there's some sharing of ideas of best practices. But I know at a county level, this has been a helpful tool, especially when they're reviewing LCAPs, to be able to provide a perspective. Now, we can go back to the site we were just on and instead look at it by charter schools. This is something we've added in this last year because, of course, we're looking at charter schools for differentiated assistance for the first time. And so there's quite a bit of schools in here that you'll see won't have particular indicators because they're only serving certain grade spans. So a lot of these that you'll see, the graduation rate doesn't exist or the college career indicator. It's because they don't have, of course, a high school grade span, or they may only been around for the last 2 years. So there's obviously a lot more charter schools than there are districts in the county of Sacramento. So there's a lot of depth of information here as well. The final report that I think has been very well received as well is our student group report. So this report talks about how each of our student groups is doing on each of the indicators. If we wanted to change the table to look at the indicators on the left side and our student groups at the top, we can also pivot this table, and sometimes that's a little bit easier for folks to look at. So again, a lot of depth of information in here. At any point in time, if I wanted to pull discrete information for this district, I can do that based on these additional reports. So it's going to take me back to the measures reports, college career information. Participation rate has been something that we've been really focused on this year. Jenny's going to talk about it in a little bit, but just to give you an idea, this is a report that we support districts by showing the percent of students who have tested this previous year. And of course, we want to hit that magic 95% as required by the federal government. But you have the raw data here. You can also, at any point in time, click on this View Downloadable Files, and it'll take you, for this one, it'll take you to this page, but for others, it'll take you directly to a downloadable report. So our data files are available here, as well as our technical guide, which right now is about 273 pages long. So lots of depth of information. So if there's no questions, I'm just going to finish out. There's just a couple.
One question real quick.
More.
So on the additional reports, it's really useful sometimes to see the data details that are underneath the 5x5s. Since there's no 5x5 for the LP this year, is there some other way to get to those data details about the LP?
Yes, so you'd be able to see that information in the downloadable files. So
But there isn't so there's nothing else in the dashboard. It would have to be downloaded? Okay.
That's correct.
But it'll be there next year when there's a 5x5.
Of course. We already did our live demonstration, and then we make available on our webpage, the webpage we were just on, where I showed you the downloadable files and the technical guide. We make available a parent guide. We're in the process of translating that updated parent guide into our top 6 languages. We have flyers for parents They're translated as well. Our videos continue to be, I think, a good method for getting information out to parents. Of course, the Spanish versions were done by Spanish-speaking actors, so they are very engaging. And there are flyers that are designed specifically for educators and those at district and school level administration. Again, available PowerPoints that we've done that are highlighting certain indicators. When we roll out the dashboard during that private preview, we do a whole series of webinars for our district and our school staff, and those are very well attended. And then we did talk a little bit about the data files for each of the indicators. So that is available, and we know that media outlets make use of those, researchers make use of those, and we've already seen some good reports out there about our 2019 data set. I walked you through some of these reports, but that is the additional reports that we just walked through are available on this slide. And then we do have a whole webpage dedicated to our alternative schools, to the DAS schools. And so you can see who's considered a DAS school automatically under education code and those that have applied to be it because they're serving our high-risk student population. We are in the process for those who were who put in information to be a DAS school when we originally started this 3 years ago. We're asking them to recertify their information. We have a 3-year renewal process, and so 3 years have already occurred. So that is actually going on now. There is some basic information about what's a DAS, frequently asked questions, as well as a whole PowerPoint around the graduation rate for alternative schools. And then I know that member Kenny had asked a question about local indicators. That work is actually not done in my office. It's done by a different division, actually under Lindsay's supervision. And so Jeff Brashears is the lead for that for the state. And you'll hear a presentation about the LCAP in a bit. And I know that a representative from his office will be here. We are responsible for the state indicators, and our information is here as well on how to contact us. And that's it. So happy to respond to any other questions.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Cindy. We're going to transition to the second part of this item, which is a general overview of the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, implementation. And we have Joseph Sanez from Government Affairs to lead us through that item. You had the slides linked ahead of time in your information, and then they'll also be on the screen up here.
All right. Hello. My name is Joe Saenz. Just give you a quick introduction. I'm the new Federal Policy Liaison for the Government Affairs Division at CDE. Some of you might remember Shanine Coates or Marguerite Reese, who filled this position before me. Just wanted to say thank you for letting me present, and I look forward to doing it in the future. This presentation is just going to be a lot of review, especially kind of the first half will be straightforward with the slides. And I think the implementation piece will be a little more detail-oriented, just to give you a heads up. So with that, we'll get started with the Every Student Succeeds Act accountability implementation. So some background on ESSA, signed into law by President Obama in December 2015. It was a reauthorization of the Federal Elementary and Secondary Education Act, replaced the No Child Left Behind Act. So it ensures educational equity and opportunity for disadvantaged and high-need students, and it's there to supplement our state programs. So for the state plan update, the U.S. Department of Education, or ED, approved California's consolidated ESSA state plan on July 12th of 2018. On November 8th, 2018, the state board approved CDE's recommendation to amend the plan for submission to the U.S. Department of Education. And these amendments were based on actions taken during the 2018 calendar year. On November 8th, 2019, the U.S. Department of Education approved California's amended consolidated ESSA state plan. January 8th, 2020, the state board approved CDE's recommendation to amend the state plan for submission to ED. And these were the amendments based on actions taken during the 2019 calendar year. Okay, and just reviewing the 2019 amendments, July 2019 state board actions, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, the graduation rate was extended, the graduation rate indicator from a 4-year and added a 5-year graduation rate. And September 2019, the state board raised the low graduation rate threshold to below 68%. November 2019 came the clarification of definitions of ineffective teacher and out-of-field teacher. Also, they adopted the status cut scores and methodology for English learner progress indicator. Also adopted status cut scores for the graduation rate indicator. So that's kind of just this. Oh, and other amendments. There was an update to reflect incorporation of the participation rate into the calculation of the academic indicator. There were revisions to reflect the evolution and additional details regarding the systems of support, and there were other typographical corrections. So that was kind of just more of the straightforward base review, and this will be get a little more detail heavy into the ESSA school support and improvement eligibility and planning, or eligibility planning and assistance. So also this discussion of this section will be focusing on the implementation for fiscal year 2018-19. So ESSA requires states to identify multiple categories of schools for different types of support with the following associated planning requirements. Generally, there are 3 categories of support, but on this slide you'll see that there are 4 categories, and that's because there are 2 subcategories of comprehensive support and improvement. So I'll explain those now. So the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools receive comprehensive support and improvement. Also, any high schools, Title I or not, with graduation rates below 67% receive comprehensive support and improvement. As discussed earlier at its September 2019 meeting, the State Board of Education took action to increase the graduation rate to 68%. However, this increase took effect with the 2019 dashboard. So the fiscal year 2018-2019 implementation is based on the 2018 dashboard. So back to the third bullet, schools with consistently underperforming student groups receive targeted support and improvement. And then schools identified under the third bullet point where a student group on its own is performing at or below the level of schools identified under bullet point number 1 receive additional targeted support and improvement. Just to note as well, CSI and ATSI support was identified for the first time in fiscal year 2018-2019. California has not yet identified for TSI, so the targeted support and improvement. All right, so once a school is identified for CSI, the ESSA requires the LEA to partner with stakeholders to develop and implement a CSI plan to improve student outcomes. As a result, the ESSA provides resources to LEAs that serve schools with implementing school improvement activities. In California, we have prioritized CSI for ESSA for funding LEAs. So while CSI funds are reserved for California's Title I Part A allocation, in order to allocate these funds to the LEA, the CDA must have legislative spending authority. So spending authority is obtained through the Annual Budget Act. Fiscal year 2018 CSI funds were appropriated through Senate Bill 862 in the Budget Act. Senate Bill 862 provided over $128 million in subgrants to local education agencies with schools identified for CSI. The legislature determined that these funds would be allocated through a formula. In addition to meeting federal school improvement requirements, the legislature also added additional requirements, which include the strategies aligned to goals, actions, and services identified in the LEA's Local Control and Accountability Plan, or LCAP. Also, they shall not be expended to hire additional permanent staff. Also, the legislature allocated $10 million of ESSA school improvement funds in grants to county offices of education, or COEs. The funds were allocated for supporting the statewide system of technical assistance and support for LEAs that serve schools identified for CSI. Here, let me go back. And so the table on this slide gives an overview of how LEAs and COEs use their CSI funds, but we'll go over this in more detail over the next 2 slides. So the LEAs are required to complete the LCAP CSI prompts in the plan summary. These prompts summarize the LEA CSI plan development, implementation, and monitoring requirements. Generally, the LEAs may use its fiscal year 2018 CSI funds for any activity that it determines will help a school identified for CSI to improve. However, intervention strategies, activities must be evidence-based and related to the following plan development and implementation activities, which are building capacity, partnering with stakeholders, conducting needs assessment and root cause analysis, selecting and implementing evidence-based intervention strategies and activities, using data and outcomes to monitor and evaluate improvement efforts, and reviewing, identifying, and addressing through implementation of the CSI plan resource inequities, which may include a review of the LEA and school-level budgeting. So COEs are required to support, review, and approve the LEA LCAP CSI prompts in the plan summary. In addition, it is the expectation that the COE will use its CSI funds to build LEA capacities to support their schools through meaningful engagement in the school improvement planning and implementation process. And since we were talking about 2018, 2019 eligibility, we'll give an overview of technical assistance and support provided to LEAs with schools identified for ESSA support. Prior to publicly releasing the 2018 ESSA School Assistance Status Data File, the CDE provided all LEAs with schools identified for ESSA support with a private preview period. Following the private preview, the 2018-19 ESSA School Assistance Status Data File was posted to the CDE CSI webpage. Also, the new school plan for student achievement template and instructions was released. This CDE SIPSA template provided LEAs with guidance on how to meet ESSA school improvement requirements through the local school planning process. Also, a CSI webpage with ESSA comprehensive support and improvement, frequently asked questions was posted, as were several trainings and webinars which were announced and conducted. And on this slide, you can see the webinars that were conducted for stakeholders in regards to ESSA planning, assistance, and funding. And then and looking forward, there will be additional school planning guidance. Also, the determination of ESSA school eligibility. So the 2019-20 assistance file was recently posted, and LEAs are now in the process of completing the 2019-20 funding. And that's all I have, so if there are any questions.
It's kind of a crazy question. I read somewhere that the federal government is thinking about changing how they do Title I funding and going to some kind of block grant, and in order to give states more flexibility. And I wondered, it was very light on details about how that would affect our ESSA state plan. So, would that mean half the rules are gone? I just wasn't sure if you guys are more in the know.
As of right now, it's just a proposal from the president. The chances that that's actually adopted, I mean, who knows going forward, but it doesn't sound that,
It's not yet well developed?
Yeah, it's not yet well developed, number one, and I don't think Congress is going for it from what I've heard so far, but it's something that we're still exploring in at least the Government Affairs Division. I don't know if any of the other program specialists could speak to that, but as of right now, it is a proposal, and it's similar to past proposals made by this administration that haven't really been adopted by Congress. Yep. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Is there any public comment on item 2?
Yes, thank you. I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. Item 2 really covered a lot, but I did want to raise an issue that was raised at State Board in January on behalf of the Equity Coalition, which is a group of advocacy and community-based organizations that are really focused on gap closure, low-income students, English learners, students of color, and making sure that our new accountability system, which we supported, really focuses on closing gaps. And especially on this item related to ESSA and your authority as the Parent Practitioners Advisory Group, we expressed a lot of concern about the fact that the board really didn't know what it was approving when it approves this process of county offices of education reviewing LEA's plans for comprehensive support and improvement. Now, those plans are through the School Plan for Student Achievement, the SIPSA, and nobody's making the county go through and review all those SIPSAs. And we know, it's common knowledge, that the school site council function at local school sites is really uneven at best. And so we had grave concerns that that accountability process of including the CSI schools in the LCAP was an adequate oversight by the board, by the state. And we asked that there be a future agenda item at State Board to really show how the system of support is meeting the state's federal obligation to media students. I recommend the same for you. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, great. Are there any last discussion about item 2? We had general overview of LCFF and ESSA, our one integrated accountability and continuous improvement system. Just want to say thank you to CDE staff for all the work they put into the resources. I've seen a lot of districts working with their principals to use the flyers and use the videos on the site. So thank you, CDE staff. Thank you, State Board staff. We're going to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break, and then we'll come back together for item 3. Okay, we're going to come back together. Super excited to come back together. We will take a small break between item 3 and 4 for folks to get their lunch. And members, just so you know, there are snacks over here. Should I say that not on microphone? Okay, we'll come back together for item 3. And again, just so members know, we'll have item 3, then we'll take a short break to get lunch, and then we'll come back together for item 4 and the rest of the agenda. So item 3, the Local Control and Accountability Plan Adoption and Training Update. We have Jonathan Fiegel from the LASSO Department, from the California Department of Education. And again, you have the slides up here and then the slides provided in advance.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm Jonathan Fiegel with the Local Agency System Support Office, and I'll be presenting to you about the Local Control and Accountability Plan. Jeff Bashir is our administrator. He sends his apologies for not being able to be here. He is out in the field supporting the implementation of the LCAP. So as you know, at its January 2020 board meeting, the California State Board of Education adopted a new template for 2020-2023, and it also updated the performance indicators for, the performance standards for the local indicators, requiring LEAs to report their local results in conjunction with adoption of the LCAP, and to report it as a non-consent item. So the LCAP template is but one piece of a larger overall LCAP development process, if you will. And this process, together with the LCAP template, serves three distinct functions. It provides for comprehensive strategic planning, meaningful stakeholder engagement, and provides an accountability and compliance process and framework. And for 1 and 2 on this list here, the middle one, meaningful stakeholder engagement, for 1 and 3 to work, 2 is really important. And so the new LCAP template, in particular the instructions, were designed with that in mind, in order to support an LEA to write an LCAP that is accessible to the general public. And one of the design features of the LCAP template that provides for this, as required in statute, and as consistent with the LCFF audit report, is to separate out the prompts and the instructions. And so the prompts, if you think about the LCAP template in terms of what most people would sit down and read, that includes the prompts and then the responses that the LEA includes in there. Those prompts provide a stakeholder an idea of what's going to come next in the box. Whereas the more detailed technical instructions are what an LEA will use in order to complete the LCAP. And it's important to call attention to the separation of the prompts and the instructions, because following the instructions is an approval criteria. So here are the 3 approval criteria for an LCAP, and adhering to the template is one of the approval criteria, which includes following all of the instructions in the LCAP template. And an LCAP that does not adhere to all of the instructions, if an LA doesn't follow all of the instructions in the LCAP template, then it's actually not an approvable LCAP. Because instructions are part of the LCAP template, they are posted with the LCAP. When an LA posts their LCAP, the instructions will be included at the end with the LCAP. Another improvement in the 2020-2023 LCAP redesign is the requirement that an LEA include actions and services that supports English learner language acquisition programs and professional development related to those programs. So now we'll just look at the LCAP template by section. And so the plan summary is the first section of the LCAP template, and the overall purpose. And so you'll notice here the instructions this is a bulleted list of the instructions, but the instructions for each section of the LCAP template include or address the purpose of each of those sections in the instructions. And this is also another way of making it clear to an LEA the purpose of that section, in hopes that it will be clear to stakeholders in terms of what's happening in that section. So the plan summary is a place that an LA provides contextual information in order to understand the LCAP within a meaningful context. And these are the prompts. These prompts have changed from the last LCAP template. The CSI prompts are still there. They're after the LCAP highlights at the bottom. They're just not included on the slide. The LEA would provide general information about their community, schools, whatever information an LEA would deem important for their stakeholders to understand the LCAP, a reflection on the successes based on dashboard and local data, and reflections on the identified needs based on a full range of data, and then a review of some highlights in the LCAP looking forward. The stakeholder engagement section, which is the next section, now has 3 prompts instead of 2. So the first prompt asks for a summary of the stakeholder process and how the stakeholder engagement was considered before finalizing the LCAP. And that how the stakeholder engagement was considered piece is also a process piece. What's the process of the overall stakeholder engagement process, but also the process of how that feedback was taken into consideration. A summary of the feedback provided by specific stakeholder groups, and it also asks for a description of the aspects of the LCAP that were influenced by stakeholder input. So now we'll look at the goals and actions section. And this section is probably one of the more altered sections in the LCAP template. So for each goal, there is what you see here on this screen and this. For each goal, we'll have all these parts, and then we'll have its own goal analysis section with it. And so, consistent with the LCFF audit, the annual update section has been merged or subsumed into the goals and actions section. And so now this section is no longer just prospective and looking forward, but it's also sort of reflective in nature. And as I go through the different parts here, I'll point out where that sort of backward-looking reflective component is brought in, because there's no more annual update section. Those functions will serve now in this section. So for the goal, is a goal number and a description, and then an explanation of why the LEA has developed this goal. In the instructions, as required by statute, the instructions encourage LEAs to prioritize their goals within one or more priorities. And the way that the LCAP template operationalizes this suggestion is by providing a conceptual framework in which LEAs can reflect on and consider the type of the goal that they're writing and how focused or broad their goals are. And so there's a focus goal, broad goals, and maintenance of progress goals. And I mention that because the requirements for filling out what goes in that explanation of why the LEA has developed this goal will be different based on what kind of a goal is being completed. But notice there's no checkbox there where you would mark this is a focus goal, this is a broad goal, this is a maintenance of progress goal. That's more of an internal discussion of what the nature of the goal is. Looking at the measuring and reporting results section. So this part looks familiar to what the expected annual measurable outcome section did in the previous template, but it is radically different. So the metric and the baseline, that looks familiar, right? The metric would be something like the attendance rate. And then in the baseline, you would put the most recently available data. That's where you're starting from. And then you would skip all the way over to the desired outcome for 2022-2023, and that's where you want to be in 3 years. So if your baseline of the attendance rate is currently 90%, say in 3 years we want to be at 97%. Those 3 columns there in the middle for year 1 outcome, year 2 outcome, and year 3 outcome, those are reflective in nature. They're retrospective in nature. And this is where one of the areas where the functions of the annual update have been brought into the goals and actions section. So for 2020-2021, all 3 of these columns will be blank, right, for this coming up LCAP for next year. When LEAs are completing year 2 of this LCAP, they will then reflect on their past performance in the year 1 of the LCAP and fill out the year 1 outcome column and so forth, right? The year 3 outcome, by that logic, would be filled out in year 4, but there is no year 4, right? So that is the sort of bridge annual update built into the template. And we'll talk about the bridge. That'll make a little bit more sense when we talk about the bridge annual update in the context of the current shift to the new template, which will come up in a minute. And then for the action section, action number, title, description, total funds, and the contributing column. And so the total funds, if you remember the actions in the current or the 2017 to 2020 template, information required for the actions took up quite a bit of space. So here it's just a nice single row. And part of the reason that this has been able to be streamlined is because of the work that's being done by the expenditure tables. So in the expenditure tables, which we'll see in a minute, you'll see for each action, among a lot of other information, it also includes the amount of funds for total LCFF funds, other state funds, local funds, and federal funds. And then that amount is totaled up, and then that's what you see in this column here. So there's no information about source or anything like that. To get that information, you would look in the expenditure tables. And then contributing, just whether or not the LEA includes this action as contributing towards meeting the increased or improved services requirement. If it does, you put Y or yes. If it doesn't, then N or no. So here, this is the goal analysis part that will be with each goal and the new template moving forward. And just like the year 1, year 2, and year 3 columns you see there, in this first year, this section will be blank. And the annual reflective, sort of retrospective evaluation of effectiveness of actions, or the annual update, sort of part of the LCAP, for this year will be served or carried out in a bridge annual update. So this will be blank for the first year, and then in following years will be completed. The questions are basically the same questions. There's some differences. I talked through each of these sections on the bigger slide. The next section after goals and actions is the increased or improved services for foster youth, English learners, and low-income students. And the information requested here is really the same as it was in the previous template, although there's some emphasis is a little different, and the order of the questions is a little different. What's really different about this section is in the instructions. So again, consistent with the LCFF audit recommendations, the instructions include more of the supporting guidance that has been developed through CDE's Uniform Complaint Procedures process, in which CDE has responded to a number of complaints in this area and has developed additional supporting guidance to help LEAs understand what it means to, for example, explain how a wide action is principally directed and effective in meeting goals for their unduplicated students. And these are some of the instructions here. In addition to the instructions that we see here, there's also an example, again, consistent with the LCFF audit. There's an example of what an explanation would look like, a good explanation of what the required justification for a wide action would look like. Here are the expenditure tables. And so depending on which LCAP you actually fill out, so there'll be the e-template or the electronic template, which I would just put a plug in for that. I think that's probably will be the more elegant solution. But there will be a Word and Excel, two separate documents, a Word document and an Excel document that can be used together to create the LCAP. And this is what it would look like in the Excel table if you use the Word Excel version, and you would fill out the information in this expenditure table, and then it would populate the 3 required expenditure tables for the LCAP. It would populate the total expenditures table, the contributing table. These are actions that are contribute towards meeting the increased and improved services requirement, and then the annual update expenditure table. This table, the data entry table, it's not required to be included with the LCAP, although it certainly can be. If you use the e-template, this information will be gathered. The workflow is a little different. It'll be gathered as you go in and put information in for each action. It'll just gather everything and then sort of create the tables. So this is the annual update that I've mentioned a couple of times. So to meet the requirements to provide for an annual update, an assessment of effectiveness of the specific actions towards meeting the goals, there is a bridge annual update, and it is essentially, except for one minor change, it is the annual update section from the 2017-20 template. The only change is that last question that asks about changes going forward for this goal. That has been, that's a little more general in nature, the way it's stated. Part of the reason is to keep the 2 templates separate and to really encourage a major shift when moving to the new template and provide LEAs the maximum amount of room to sort of maneuver and reconsider things and make changes as they deem necessary. The local indicators, the yellow there highlights the parts that are new, and that was one of the things that the board did in January was they changed the performance standards for the local indicators as part of a non-consent item, and then in conjunction with adoption of the LCAP. And so far, in conjunction with adoption of the LCAP means that at the same board meeting that the LCAP is being adopted. Finally, the reporting timeline. And so you see in January 2020, the performance standards were changed. So now LEAs will collect and analyze their most recent, most current local data, and then report it to the local governing board in conjunction with adoption of the LCAP And then when the dashboard reporting period opens, they can report it up to the dashboard. That is the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Questions?
Is this PowerPoint? I wasn't sure if it was posted with our agenda or if it's from maybe from the state board agenda, or could it be posted? I guess if it's not, I guess is the question.
I'm not sure. Yeah, who would I ask? Yeah.
Okay, great. And then I went to one of the trainings and they talked about how the new template and instructions were going to be posted up on the CD website. I checked, I may not have checked yesterday, but I know I checked Monday, but I didn't see them. And at first it said February 5th. Is there a new date?
So right now the date is by the end of this week. So the end of day or close of business this Friday. The e-template will be available, open up, will be launched, and the Word and Excel document will be available on CD's website.
Excellent, good.
Thank you, good question.
2 questions on the guidance. And one is, and I love this word, but I don't know if there's guidance in the instructions, material differences in the actual expenditures versus the budgeted for the annual update. Is there a commonly accepted understanding of what material means? Or is it kind of up to everyone to figure out what they want to consider material and what their county office considers material? Is it 5%? Is it 10%?
I think both of those are accurate, actually. And so that has been one of the issues that has been taken up by CDE in response to several complaints, UCP complaints, and to sort of adjudicate and provide supporting guidance on what it would mean to what would constitute a material difference. It really is largely up to the LEA, as long as they're not being arbitrary or capricious in their judgment about the matter. But it's not, the guidance put out by CDE really doesn't focus on the amount of money. It's not a difference, an absolute difference in the amount being spent or a relative difference. What really makes something a material difference is whether or not it changes the practice sort of on the ground. So one example that we often use is we might budget $150,000 for a new teacher and only spend $100,000 because we hired on the top left part of the pay scale as opposed to the bottom right. That's a $50,000 difference. That's 33%. It's pretty big, right? There might be another difference. We might have budgeted $5,000 for classroom supplies and have spent $2,500. So that's a $2,500 difference. That seems kind of small, but from someone who used to be a teacher, $2,500 can mean a lot. Big difference in the classroom in terms of the activities that can be carried out. And so again, there is obviously some room for judgment there. But the defining factor of a material difference is the effect that it has on practice.
All right, so and maybe that's kind of the answer, and I don't know if that ever can end up somewhere in guidance, is if it has an effect, if it changes the impact of the thing that it was purchasing. So to your first example about the teacher, if you hired a teacher, the fact that you spent less to hire the teacher doesn't matter because you hired the teacher who was able to provide services.
Right.
So material were you still able to implement the service you were meaning to? Mm-hmm. I think that's a good answer. I'm not sure that there was an increase of guidance or instructions about how districts are supposed to be able to measure the increase or improvement of a certain percentage of services. And I know this is something the state audit said, while this is the law, it's not clear to us that anyone knows how to do it and that anyone can check whether they're doing it correctly. Therefore, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like an implementable law, I'll put it that way. I don't think there is any additional guidance on how to measure improvement of a service by a percentage.
The guidance put out by CDE explicitly addresses the adequacy of explanations in which an LEA describes how they will meet their increase or improved services requirement, and whether or not the required justification for how any sort of school-wide or LEA-wide or charter-wide or county-wide action is principally directed or effective in meeting goals. And so the guidance sort of addresses those two things. but I can't speak to the.
Okay. I mean, and that's the law. And so what you're saying is if you follow the guidance, you are doing the right type of thing with the money, but whether you've increased by 5% when your allocation was 10% is really hard. And I guess that's the concern that people have is if you're measuring by percent and everyone can make it up as they go along, then it's really hard for advocates to say, yes, the students who needed the money got the money for what they needed. One last question, which is on the school plan template, the SPSA template. So I think actually in the presentation before this, we saw that the school plan template was updated last January or February. So now we have a new LCAP template, and it feels a little like it would be great if the school plan template also was updated. But the part that I really wanted to focus was on the budget expenditure tables. And so that would be fantastic to have in school plans, because that is something that in the current school plan template is really difficult to understand what money is being spent on what services. The same way, I mean, actually, I'm not even sure the school plan template is where our LCAP template was. So I don't know if there's plans by anyone to now incorporate some of these added benefits from the LCAP template into the school plan template.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll vote for that.
And the comment that I have is more around stakeholder engagement and being more, as we're trying to create this system that's more coherent. I mean, ideally, what I would like to see is a lot of the same practices and expectations be held not just at the district level for those that are developing the LCAP, but at the school side level for principals that are running those school side council meetings, or for other divisions within CDE. And this is coming from experience when it comes to the school side council. Oftentimes we would meet. As chair, I was able to request additional time so that we could dig into data analysis and provide recommendations. But oftentimes the recommendations that were gathered from the group were not really fully considered in the final plan. With the UCP process that has been opened up since 2013 out of an audit, I've also led or co-led a coalition where different members and agencies have submitted comments. And after 9-12 months of comments, really not much has changed from the regulations other than just minor, not substantive changes. And so it's really frustrating. But at least, we're seeing progress in terms of stakeholder engagement with districts, with their LCAPs. In this type of setting, we see that members are more receptive, or staff is more receptive of the recommendations, but outside of these spaces, we're still seeing a lot of challenge. So my request is, as we build this coherent system, to make sure that it's not just one piece that's taking care of the engagement, but that the same expectations apply across the board.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah.
So I also don't have a question, but more of a comment. First of all, I did want to say thank you for an excellent presentation and for all the hard work on this. I assume that you guys are going to sort of be gently pushing people to do the electronic version because it's less burdensome and it auto-populates things, right?
Yeah, I would not even be gentle about it. I would say it's probably best to use the template.
Very good, very good. Don't be gentle. That was a sort of a petty comment. My main comment is looking at the other side, the vetting process of these in the county, and I'm still sort of unclear whether counties talk to each other and there's any sort of harmonization or consistency of the vetting process of LCAPs. And some of the things that we just heard, how would you define a material change in your plans, right? It would seem that it might be the role of the person who's vetting this to help the district make that determination, or at least check whether maybe there was what a typical person would consider a material change that the district hasn't put down there. So I'm just wondering, would this not be sort of a role of the officer of the county who's in charge of vetting these? And then, are counties getting together? Is there any guidance for counties to have a uniform vetting process for LCAPs. And I'm just not sure. It's more of a question. I'm not sure if you know. But
Yeah, it might be a question for Successa.
Okay.
You know, they have some work around that area.
Okay.
I could weigh in on that. So as a county superintendent, yes, we have structures in place where there's a degree of calibration and collaboration when it comes to the preparation of our reviews and looking at consistency. But of course, we're still in the implementation phase in one sense. So to answer your question, yes.
Is that sort of internal to the county, where you have multiple people vetting LCAPs from the districts within your county, or is there any cross-county collaboration?
I'm referencing cross-county collaboration in particular.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Open item 3 up for public comment.
Hello, Liz Guillen with Public Advocates again. We worked very closely with other organizations and community groups in the Equity Coalition to get comments in for changes to the LCAP template and the instructions. It could be a really good improvement, but it's really going to hinge on following the instructions. And our experience with the first 2 versions was that LEAs didn't follow the instructions very well. But now it's clearer in the instructions that everything in the instructions and in the LCAP template are binding. So how well it goes, a lot will depend on how well people are trained and supported. We are really privileged to be working with the state board and the department staff to do a couple of LCAP workshops to roll out the new template. And so, for example, we're holding a countywide training in Sacramento for existing members of LCAP, parent advisory committees, and DLACs. This is not a newbie training, but a training for folks who already know the process so that we can help them understand what the good changes are in the LCAP and in the instructions so that they can enforce their rights and their obligations as community stakeholders. We're also doing one in the Bay Area at the end of March. And I'm interested in doing another one, but I just haven't had the bandwidth yet to work on that. So if any of you in your areas are interested in a partnership like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, I urge all of you to really become experts in your LCAP and look at the instructions. They're so much better. And we think that it can make a huge difference how they're trained, rolled out, implemented, and enforced. Thank you.
Any other discussion from the members? Okay, we're going to take a 30-minute lunch, so we'll come back together at 12:30. Or, okay, you want to give me full 30? 12:35. We'll come back together at 12:35 for item 4. Okay, we'll come back together for item 4. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, CDE staff, for organizing lunch. So for item 4, we have an update on the continuing developing work and revisions under consideration for the 2020 California School Dashboard. And we have the fabulous Jenny Singh. I had to put that in there.
Okay.
Who will provide an update and discussion questions at the end. Slides were provided beforehand, and then they're also on the TV for your reference. So.
Great. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's very kind of you. As she said, I'm going to be presenting item 4 for you. So we're going to be talking about all the things that we're going to be bringing to the board in March. As you know, part of the process, the continuous improvement process of the dashboard, is that every year in March we take our work plan to the board for them to review and approve. So here are the things that we are planning to bring to the board in March. We're going to talk about the next steps for the student level growth model. Some new career measures that we're going to be introducing for the college and career indicator. We're going to also be exploring the stability of our indicators. And then we're going to be looking at the change cut scores in 5x5s for the English Learner Progress Indicator, or the ELPI. So for the growth model, this is the timeline that we have laid out. So all of you know that we did put a pause on pursuing the growth model because of the work that we have been doing with ETS. They found that the growth model was somewhat unstable. So we have put a pause on that. The state board asked us to get together a stakeholder group, and we had 4 meetings with the stakeholder group on the growth model and got their input for really what they wanted to see from a growth model. So based on that information and based on conversations that we've been having with state board members and staff, we took the growth model back to the technical design group, the TDG, this month to talk about some business rules that we might want to implement. And I'll get into more detail in that in a little bit. And of course, Jesse was there to help us with that, so he might want to speak to this issue. So we're going to be including the growth model in our work plan in the March item. We will reconvene our stakeholder group to provide them an update on some of the technical changes that we're considering for the growth model. Then in May, we'll be updating the SBE members on the work completed to date. And in the summer, we're going to be presenting information to various stakeholder groups and getting their feedback. And then July and September is hopefully when the state board will take action on the growth model. So our proposal for at this moment is that we're going to move forward with the residual gain model. That is the model that we actually were pursuing prior to the pause that we had. And it's going to be used as information only for 2020. We need, I think, a little bit of time to communicate the growth model out to people and to get them used to it, to determine if there's tweaks that need to be made if we want to implement it into the dashboard. So the one thing we know for sure is, just like last time, we are not going to be including demographic data in the model. So here's some of the things that we were exploring with our technical design group. We want to really look at the stability of our current change metric versus the individual student growth model metric. And so we've been looking at that a little bit. We wanted to look at the impact on the number of districts and schools that may not receive a color if we go to a growth model. Because remember, when you go to a growth model, less students are going to be included. Because A, you don't have grade 3 in there because you have to have 2 sets of scores. So it's just 4 through 8. And of course, you have to have scores in both years to be included in the growth model. So we did a little bit of analysis for our technical design group. The impact on schools and districts, very small. Most of them would still receive colors. It's the impact on student groups. So some of the student groups, such as African American, students with disabilities, many schools, districts would not be receiving colors for these groups. So that is a conversation we're going to continue with our technical design group on how we can lessen that impact. And we're also going to be talking about differentiated expectations based on grade configurations. We all know that the way the Smarter Balance work, there's differences in how students perform at various grade levels. So do we want to take that into consideration? So we are going to be working with our colleagues and friends in the assessment division on this as well. We're going to be, of course, working on inclusion rules. I mean, when we first did the simulations, we said that students had to, and I should have changed this because I don't want to say valid. That's not the word we want to use anymore. Valid for accountability purposes means that they've met all of our inclusion rules. And the biggest inclusion rule, of course, is that the student was there from census day until the first day of testing. So when we first did the analysis, we said, oh, they had to meet all the business rules for both years to be included. So we're going to reconsider that to try to get more scores in. And then we might be making some technical adjustments to the model. ETS, who we worked with on this in the prior years, has been actually working on how some adjustments that they could make to the model that would make it more stable from year to year. Remember, that was the biggest issue, the stability from year over year. It wasn't very strong, so they've been working on that. Of course, there's always give and takes when you do that, and so we will be looking at what they've done. Hopefully, they will have a report for us within the next month so that we can take that to the TDG for conversation and determine how we want to proceed. And then, of course, output of regression scores limits possible positive results on the change access. So right now, every school has an opportunity to show positive results on the 5x5s. That's not every school does, but every school has the opportunity. So with a growth model, especially residual gain, usually what happens if you're using those regression scores, it's half of the schools will meet the target and half will not. That's just what the residual gain model is for. So we're going to be looking at how we can maybe make sure that we report scores in a way that all schools could show positive growth. And then this is something that our assessment colleagues have been working on, is lifting the ceiling on the highest attainable scale score. That's the HOS. As you know, there is a limit on the HOS to how high a student can score. Other states have already said, you know, that ceiling is was set a little bit low, so students aren't really able to demonstrate growth at the higher level, and so we are considering making a change there. We did a presentation to the TDG. They asked for more data, which the assessment office said that they would run and bring back to our next meeting. So I don't know, if Jesse, do you have anything you would like to add? Mm-hmm. And yeah, we were going to be looking at school side. I think also we were going to look at distribution by grades. We wanted to see, the TDG requested that. Yeah. So we're on it. We're working on it, and hopefully we'll be ready to share results in late spring. Moving on to the new career measures that we've collected for the CCI. So I will say that this was done before we made some changes, so I'm going to be talking about some changes we're going to be making. So we collected for the first time in 2018-19 some of the data that you see here. Recall that the State Board requested that we collect more career measures. The CCI has a lot of measures in there for college, determine if students are prepared for college, but very few career measures. So we collected the completion of pre-apprenticeships. We also collected in CalPADS the completion of a state or federal jobs program. We are collecting whether students earn a workforce readiness certificate, and what this workforce readiness certificate is, it's really the soft skills. How are students doing with communication, collaborations, interview skills, those sorts of things. One of the things that we heard from some of our CCI work group members were that those students who complete CTE pathways, they might have the technical skills, but when they go to get employed, they're hearing that a lot of the students don't have the soft skills that are necessary. So we're collecting that. We also collected the food handler certification. We did that because we have a member on our Alternative Schools Task Force who is representing juvenile court schools. And they said that, you know, juvenile courts have limited opportunities to provide access to some of these other programs. So we might want to consider this for juvenile court schools. So we collected that information. This was all collected in CalPADS. The other two measures that we have here, the completion of workability courses and work-based learning, and the completion of the Department of Rehabilitation work-based learning, was collected through CASEMIS in 2018-19. So we had to really think about, when we have these career measures, how are we going to determine which students are prepared, which students are approaching prepared, and eventually which students are well prepared. And so we had lots of conversations. We did a little bit of research, and we thought one of the best ways to do that is to look at time. How much time have students spent? How much time have they gotten for the work-based learning? How much time have they spent in courses? So we couldn't collect that in CalPads for these two things, so CaseMIS offered to do it for us. Unfortunately, the time component was not a mandatory reporting requirement in CaseMIS. As a result, none of the districts reported the data. So that's left us a little bit perplexed. So I didn't know exactly how to move forward, but again, talking with our colleagues in the special education division, they actually said that they have some data on workability, on how much time students are actually in a job, and they could base some information on that for us to collect what we think is required for students to be prepared for the 2020 dashboard. We really do want to get something in for the 2020 dashboard for students with IEPs, because we know that there's not a lot of measures in there for them, so we want to make sure that we have something. And then, of course, moving forward for the 21 dashboard, we'll hopefully be able to collect time again. Another change we're going to make here is that we are no longer going to be calling it workability and Department of Rehabilitation. So I did know from the very beginning that workability was actually something that not all districts had. It is a grant that is put out. Some districts have the program, others do not. But I did know that all districts had access to the Department of Rehabilitation. Although I did not realize, because I'm not a special ed person, that not all districts actually utilize the Department of Rehabilitation. A lot of them have their own programs. So we were getting feedback from our special ed colleagues in regards to this area. So now we're just going to be collecting, we're not going to call it workability, we're not going to be calling it Department of Rehabilitation, we're just going to be calling transition programs. And one of it is going to be work-based learning, and the other is course-based learning. So that's what we're going to be collecting in CalPads for the 1920 school year.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Before you go on, could you, with the question of time, is, for example, in the first four, which I'll have a certificate of something or a completion of a given program, are they still looking at time, or is it just going to be the certificate and the completion?
So for these other programs, the pre-apprenticeship and these are programs that people complete, we're not looking at time, because there's certain requirements in these programs, like the completion of a state or federal jobs program that's in law, that students have to meet in order to complete the program. So we're not looking at time in those.
And then for the ones, the special ed ones where you are, is people's length of time correlated with their need for additional training, or is it correlated better with certain markers of progress or some kind of outcome?
So that is the research that our colleagues in the special education division are going to be working on. They have the data, and they're going to be looking at it for us. They just started the work, so we probably won't be back to have a conversation with them again for at least another 2 or 3 weeks. And then we're going to take it out to, of course, SECO, which is a special education, and the SELPAs, and get their input before we go further. So I'm really dependent on their expertise for these particular.
Thank you.
I have
Yes.
a quick question. So I see that food handler certification, would OSHA could be considered, or maybe even like a BLS class for basic life support or something like that? I'm just thinking of the juvenile court systems, but also at our school, most of our students get those, but just a food handlers, but like a OSHA certificate or like a BLS class or something like that might be beneficial to places that can't really have that CTE portion.
That has not been brought up, but I will make a note of that, and we can have that conversation with our Alternative Schools Task Force and with our CCI work group. Okay. Okay, so here is the timeline. We said early 2020 we're going to be, the we're going to be working with our committees to figure out how to incorporate these measures into the CCI and make a recommendation to the state board. That work is already undergoing. We met with our Alternative Schools Task Force yesterday, and we're going to meet with our CCI work group on Monday. So we are moving forward with this. Of course, we'll be bringing this as part of our work plan for March, and hopefully in July we'll be able to propose to the SBE the criteria that we want for prepared and approaching prepared for each of the measures that we want to recommend inclusion into the CCI. So for proposed collection for 2021, this is actually, we had to really work with the SSI vendors on this, because this is collecting. We wanted to, again, collect the amount of time students had in regards to student internships, to virtual simulated work-based learning, and for student-led enterprises. As again, these are career measures. We don't want to look at how students are performing on ELA and math as part of the criteria of using to determine which students are prepared or approaching prepared. So time was one of the things we thought could help us as we move forward. We could look at the distributions just like we do for all of our other measures and determine what is considered approaching prepared and prepared. So this was a heavy lift for the vendors. And our colleagues in the CalPADS office have been working very closely with them, and they had indicated that the first time that they could collect this would be in the 2021 school year, because they had to make significant changes to their systems in order to collect this information. So that is something that is going to be coming, that is upcoming. And we're really excited about it, having the student internships and the student-led enterprises, as well as the virtual simulated work-based learning. So the collection of the students, so beyond the 2020 dashboard, we have been in conversations with representatives from the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, or ASVAB test, for inclusion of that information in the CCI. Other states have already included this information into the CCI. Of course, please remember that all of this stuff has to go to the state board for approval. These are just the recommendations that we're going to be bringing forward. And so we are working with our CalPADS colleagues to collect this information for the 2021 school year. We are, they will not provide us with a statewide data file. That is not allowable for them to provide to states, so we actually have to collect the data from the LEAs if we decide we want to move forward with this.
Interestingly and coincidentally, we just had a discussion on this at the district board meeting last night. Oh. And one of the things that I learned, which I did not know previously, was that the ASVAB is available to students under age 18, but it requires parent permission. And no parent permission required when they're 18. So I'm wondering if that differentially will impact school districts or locales that do or do not have the kind of response rate.
Mm-hmm. Well, so remember, that's a really good question, because remember the CCI is not designed to say, we're not putting measures in the CCI and saying everyone has to do this. We're putting measures in the CCI so that we can capture and give credit to schools who are doing certain things that we think are helpful for students to be prepared for success after high school. So when we were telling people we were going to be collecting internships, a lot of small districts were saying, well, this is going to hurt our CCI. No, it's not. If you have other things in place that you're doing to help prepare your students for success, we're going to still count those. This is not saying that you have to do everything that we put in the CCI. In fact, I think that it would be impossible for schools to do everything that's in the CCI. So pick what works well for your school and focus on that so you can prepare your students for success. One of the other things that we liked about the ASVAB, because we've been talking, we had several meetings with the staff, is that any student who wants to take it, whose parents give permission, can take it. They can indicate whether they want to be contacted or not by the armed forces. And It is really designed to give them feedback on where their strengths are for various careers, right? So are they more mechanically inclined? Here's some of the careers you may want to pursue. So it is providing them with information so that they can plan for what they want to do after high school. And I think we've had a lot of district heads that have been very pleased with being able to provide that to their students.
And also, most of the unions use the ASVAB as an indicator to allow that person to then join the union, so that makes them more.
I did not know that.
There you go.
Well, thank you. I learned something new today. Thank you. And then, of course, we're going to be working with our colleagues in the department around the inclusion of the state seal of civic engagement. That's not going to, of course, happen until the 2022 dashboard. There's a lot of developmental work that has to be done, and we are just now getting together a subgroup in order to help us out with what information do we need to collect in order to make sure that we can include this in the CCI. And of course, once we determine what we need to collect, then we have to go through the process of getting that going through CalPads and making sure that they can collect it for us. So it's going to be at least the 2022 dashboard. Any questions about the CCI? Oh.
So the current CTE indicator on the CCI. So I had to bring up that lovely graphic that like lists all of them, and there's the additional pick one from this box. And so the CTE pathway is one where you have to pick one of those other things from that box.
Yes, it's a we call it CTE plus.
So are these things that you're looking at going to be standalone, or will they also be do this plus do one of those things from that box?
So we haven't gotten the recommendations from all of our work groups yet, but I would imagine that some would be standalone and some would be a plus. So, but like I said, we have our meeting with our CCI work group on Monday, and of course then we need to take it out to stakeholder groups and get their feedback as well. Okay, so this was covered a little bit in the presentation that.
Questions or just clarifying questions or discussion on the CCI?
I think a few people just had questions. We will, when Jenny's done, we will have time for discussion, but if you have a question now, we can also.
Okay, so the LB was covered a little bit by Cindy in her presentation this morning, so I will reiterate again that once we have the 2019-20 LPAC assessments, once they become available to us, we will be doing I should say my Jonathan and his office will be doing some simulations and taking that to the technical design group to work out recommendations for change and how to calculate that for the LP. We will, of course, at the same time be looking again at status because now we will have more years of data. That is something that we did with our ELA and math when we first introduced that. We went back and looked at both status and change after when we had more data to look at. And then, of course, we will be bringing the recommendations to the state board in the fall. We'll, of course, bring the change cut scores recommendations and maybe possible revisions to the status cut scores. And then, of course, the long-awaited colors will be reported in the 2020 dashboard. So we're pretty happy about that. We will also be exploring the stability of our indicators, our state indicators. So we've had stakeholders say that the current 5x5 does not yield stable results. And let me be clear what I mean by stable results. I'm not saying that everyone should say the same color every year. That would not be a good model, right? What we are saying is that we don't want to see schools change from blue to yellow in 1 year. So we want to make sure that when we see a change, it's really representing a change that actually happened that has a bigger impact at the school. And so we're really trying to see how we can make sure, unless there's a drastic reduction or increase, depending on the indicator, that small changes would result in just a change in one color. So that's what we're looking at. So we have been, we talked to the TDG about this and on how we want to proceed. We're thinking about revising the 5x5 to have 2 colors per row. That's what we have in the academic indicator. So, so if you go down in one row, you can go from blue to green, but you can't go from blue to yellow like you can in some of the other indicators. Remember now, that's only if you maintain that high status. If your status goes, down to low, then of course there would be a dramatic change in the color, and rightfully so. And then we're thinking about moving to, maybe we're going to be looking at applying the 3x5 to all population sizes and not just for those that are small sizes. So I have staff working on this now to determine the best way to move forward. And of course, we will be bringing that back to you for review in the future. The California Science Test, we anticipate that we will have valid and reliable results for reporting in the 2022 dashboard. Recall that this science test, the CAS, was field tested in 2017-18, and the first operational test was administered this past year in 18-19. In November, the SBE adopted the new science instructional materials, which are based on the California Next Generation Science Standards. Because these materials were only adopted in 2018, and I'm not sure they've been adopted for high school yet, but at least for K-8, we wanted to give some time to schools to have the materials and teach the content before we incorporate the science test into the dashboard. Yes.
So I just want to make a comment because this has been a discussion. I'm liaison to a lot of the science community work that we do. And this is so important, the work we're doing in science. And there's been a lot of articles came out in the LA Times, that sorts, all the things about how the first round of science scores were not that good. But I think we need to remember that while we adopted NGSS in 2013, it took a while to get our framework and then to get adopted materials. And so the adopted materials, I met with the Science Collaboration Committee. It's like science leaders from around the state. And I asked them recently, what's going on in the communities and the districts that you serve? Where is the adoption happening? What do you see time-wise? Some districts are working on an adoption for 2021, for the next school year. But more are doing it for 21-22 because they're still they're dealing with budget issues, they're dealing with teachers needing to learn the framework. And so when I talked to the science leaders and said to them, so when is it reasonable for us to get this on the dashboard? Because we want to share the data, which we did, but not with any consequences like we're hitting you over the head. We're basically saying you need to pay attention to the framework. You need to pay attention to the standards, and we need to get going on this. And most of the science leaders said not before 2022. And I would just have to say, as a liaison, we've been working on science for 7 years already. So why do we not have something on the dashboard yet? But I think it's important to think about what's going on in the field and where the awareness is of the standards and of the aligned materials. And so that's really why right now we're recommending that. And I do think the CDE staff could share with you too the challenges of how we put the dashboard together based, remember our dashboard, we're trying to balance California accountability with federal accountability, so we only have one measure. And there's some guidelines, which either Sarah or maybe Cindy wants to share about if we tweak our dashboard to include the science, then what are the challenges of making this fit with the federal requirements so we only have one? So is this the right time for you to share that? Okay. Okay. Or Jenny, you going to do that? Okay.
So when we were negotiating with the U.S. Department of Education, a lot of states were doing what they call the combined scores, right? Somewhat like we had with the API. You get a number. What does that number mean? Well, it means something different for everybody. Right? It doesn't mean the same thing. The same number could mean something different for every school. And so because we said that we did not want to combine, have a combined rate, they wanted to make sure that when we were looking at our indicators that we had the appropriate balance and that we didn't remember that we have to give more weight to those indicators that they have deemed as academic indicators versus non-academic indicators. So we would have to really be talking to the U.S. Department of Education because they're really focused on for accountability, ELA, math. I don't know if they would consider science an academic indicator, or if they would say that we can't include it as an academic indicator, and if we can't include it as an academic indicator, then we would have an imbalance between our academic measures and our non-academic measures, which is one of the reasons why we didn't do chronic for 9-12, because we would then have that imbalance between those indicators. So did I leave anything out? Okay. And I know you might be thinking, well, why would they not think it's an academic indicator? Well, it's so hard to predict. I can't tell you. There's lots of things that happen that are surprising to me. So I try to keep myself from being surprised again. Yes, Kimberly.
So I think this is still a clarifying question. So back when you were talking about growth model, so the idea is that it would replace the current change in status. Well, academic indicator, like we would get the growth and the current one would go away, or it would be in addition to?
So that we're having conversations about how we want to proceed with the growth model. Do we want it to be a standalone, or do we want the student level growth metric to be our new change metric? We would still have status, but would it be the new change metric, and we'd get rid of the current change metric? So there's lots of conversations going on about that.
But not necessarily one that says it replaces status.
No, we haven't had that conversation about replacing status.
All right. And then, so reclassification rate, that once upon a time was part of LP, and is still a state required metric for the LCAP. Will it ever become part of the dashboard? And if not, why not?
Well, again, we have to make sure that we maintain that balance. You know that we had the conversation with the U.S. Department of Education about including RFEP students in the LP. It was a very long conversation, and I think that SBE staff and CDE staff, when they went to Washington, they really spent a lot of time on this. We thought that they understood why we thought it was important to include it, but in the end, they said, no, you have to take it out. So I don't think that they would consider that as an academic indicator, and that we would then have an imbalance. And remember, the state board has always said that they want a concise set of measures. So I think the state board they don't want the dashboard to grow so much to where there's that we're holding schools and districts accountable for everything in the LCAP. We're just trying to, they're trying to get the concise measures that they feel are really important that we should focus on.
I won't go into how important reclassification is to English learners, but are we saying that we're really constrained in our dashboard by ESSA, or do we have some flexibility in calling things local indicators, even if there is quantifiable data captured by the state? I mean, we can put things in our dashboard.
I think we have a lot more flexibility when it comes to local indicators. You're correct. And I think once we get the adoption of, right now, every district has their own criteria for reclassifying students. So that makes it very difficult to put something that's not standardized in the dashboard, especially if you're going to give it a color. So I think until there is that standard reclassification criteria, that would be very hard to do as well. Because remember, we want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples across all the schools and districts. Yes, we are moving into discussion. That's the slide that's up there.
Well, and there are kind of questions and comments about some of the new career measures, and I think it's great that you guys are moving to explore and potentially include more career measures. I had some questions, I guess, just in terms of next year, why work-based learning is limited to students with IEPs. You know, it seems like for the next year, you're looking at including virtual and simulated work-based learning. So, I mean, a work-based learning could be virtual and simulated or not. And are you considering looking at that for all schools?
Yes, we are considering looking at that at all schools, and one of the reasons why we couldn't include it this year is because our vendors were unable to collect the number of hours that students were participating in these in the internships and simulated work-based learning activities, and we thought that's what we decided we were going to use as our metric for determining the difference between prepared and approaching prepared.
So it sounds like it's coming, and internships is where you're capturing work-based learning.
It is
that's
coming.
Not simulated.
Yes.
Or virtual.
So, and for the students who have an IEP, we were able to collect that because K-SMIS actually had a mechanism to collect the hours. And so we said, hey, we can just move forward with that because they have that information, and we can collect the hours, and we can do our standard setting by it. Like I said, it was a little bit of a snag when none of the districts reported that information. So that set us back on that as well.
My other comment is around, I know, a couple of years ago when we first started talking about the college and career indicator here in this group, we talked about measures that would capture both college and career readiness. And I wonder if that seemed like something that the board wasn't quite ready to tackle back then, but it seemed like it was still on the table for the future. Is that still on the table for the future in a direction you all are aiming towards?
It is still on the table for the future. We felt it was really difficult to do that until we had some more career measures in place. Once we have more career measures in place, we start collecting all of this data, we can start talking about a well-prepared level. And that would mean those that are considered well-prepared would be both college and career ready, because that's the direction that the board has asked us to go in. But we still need to do some of that data collection before we can make those decisions.
And then my last comment is just that I think it's great that you guys have that long-term vision of adding civic engagement to the indicator. It feels like it captures where we want to go in California.
Thank you.
Just as a note of levity, I noticed on the slide for civic engagement, civil engagement. I think they're both really important.
Oh, no! I am so sorry. I will have to make that. Yes, there is a difference. Both important, but.
Just a real quick question, and maybe this is a question for the other advisory group, the technical one, but can you give us a sense of the different growth models that we've studied as we're preparing our proposal for the state board? I know CORE has one, but are there others that we're considering, and sort of what's gone through the analysis that's bringing us to our proposal?
So we did study some other growth models, and then we took that out to stakeholder groups, and we ended up with 3 that we asked ETS to work on and run simulations for us. One was the percentile growth model. That's the one that most people would associate with Colorado. And the other one was based on our change metric that we were doing. And based on all of the data that they ran and the simulations that they did, they felt that the residual gain model was the strongest. And that's why we move forward with that. But there is an ETS report out there. It is actually available on a memo that we provided to the board. If you go to the memos, Cindy, do you remember which month that was? Okay. So hopefully we'll find out shortly. Any other questions? Comments?
Just a quick comment: if the internship factor or indicator that's listed in the CCI, does it actually also capture if students work already? Because internship typically it could be paid, it could be volunteer. But I remember way back when I was in high school, a lot of myself and a lot of my peers would work. So, it wasn't readiness. We were already doing it in part because we had to bring in money for whatever reason, right?
Correct. So we feel that when we're talking about internships, it's very broad. It could be paid or unpaid. It could be summer internships or working during the school year. But one of the requirements is that it has to be something that is facilitated by the school. So if students go out and get their own job, for the CCI, we don't think that that is something that we should take into consideration because we want the school to be connecting the internships with actual with the curriculum that is happening on the school campus. So we are looking to make sure that the schools have an active role in securing the internships or jobs for students.
The other question that I have is more on examples for the student-led enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Because I see a lot of now the new generation, my kids, they want to set up their own businesses, do YouTube channels and websites. And so I'm wondering if that's captured there, or does it have to go back to the school?
Well, it has to be in connection with the school. Everything here, I mean, we're giving this, we're trying to see how well the school is preparing students to do this. And hopefully, whenever they're setting something up, it is in connection with the curriculum that is happening on the school campus. So if they're in taking like a business course and they do a student-led enterprise, that is something, student-led enterprise is something that generates money, funds, some kind of funds. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to earn a profit. You may not earn a profit. It's preferable that you do, but we're not saying that you have to earn a profit in order to be considered for inclusion in the CCI. So there's a couple examples. You mentioned students making their own websites to sell things. If that's in association with the class that they're doing, that would be considered. There's a lot of student-led enterprises associated with agriculture and with the hospitality. With agriculture, I always give the example of my niece because she was tasked with raising a goat for her class, and there's certain criteria that have to be met when you're taking care of animals, right? And it's overseen by the instructors to make sure that the animals are well taken care of and fed, and have a clean place to stay, that sort of thing. And if you don't do that, you get kicked out of the program. So she raised her goat, and then she had to take it for auction. So that was where the profit comes in, or the money comes into play. She actually lost $5 on the deal, but she learned she gained a lot of information going through that process. So there are a lot of different ways for students to be able to get into this, to the student-led enterprises. But it does have to be connected somehow to what is happening on the school site.
Sorry. So to piggyback on what she said, and because I know she was talking about students just having like their leisure time job, but what you're looking for is that it's a job placement based on the CTE that they already have, correct?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a CTE.
But it matches whatever is going on at the school.
Correct.
So if they are doing construction and they get a job at Home Depot, that would count because that's sort of construction.
Well, as long as the school is helping with the placement of those students, so they're going out to the business and saying, we have students who are interested in this particular field. Would you mind, would you be interested in having some students to do internships for you, right? And if they say yes, then that would count. Yes.
Jenny, I know 2 questions. One, I know we have a meeting in June and one in October. Will we see any of this coming back before it goes to state board, do you think?
So it is our goal to have to take some of this stuff to the state board in July and to bring it to you in June. So like I said, we are working on it. We're working with our work groups right now, and we've got a plan in place, and I'm hoping everything goes according to plan.
Second question. First of all, I really appreciate seeing constant revisiting of the indicators and testing of the indicators. So thank you for that. I have a question about one that's not on your list.
Oh, okay.
So I'm wondering if there's been revisiting of the chronic absenteeism indicator.
In what way?
Just in looking at distribution of schools and districts across the state, and what the colors look like in that distribution. And
So we have not looked at the distribution. Remember, one of the goals that we had with the state board really wanted us to set a distribution, not make changes to that distribution if at all possible, so that we give schools and districts the opportunity to demonstrate growth over time. But, you raise a good point. We've had people bringing up other issues about chronic absenteeism. It's something that's been brought up by the alternative schools and how it affects, students who go to these alternative schools. So that's probably something that we're going to be talking with our alternative schools task force about in the future. And then, of course, that would mean that we would be taking a look at the distributions again.
so that may come up this year, even though it's not on the list.
It may come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
One idea that I heard from, actually, Joanne was asking me, we were talking about it, is do you think in our dashboard we would ever be at a position where we could use our dashboard, in a sense, with interconnected measures, particularly for when we're looking at who qualifies for different kinds of support and assistance? And we were talking about this chronic absenteeism, and I was thinking about a school that I know that has a fairly high level of chronic absenteeism, but they also have very high performance. And so for whatever, societal reasons, there's a lot of absenteeism, which is usually, families deciding to make choices for where the children are going to be for a week or two. It's not negatively impacting the performance. And yet there are other situations that I can think of, other schools where there's a fairly high level of absenteeism and performance is low. And it may or may not be that those are connected. One would think that they might be. But unless it's, kind of pervasive illnesses or something like that. But still, it's a different kind of picture. The same thing I think happens, I was thinking about this, the same thing could happen with the performance, say, in English language arts and math vis-a-vis the performance of English learners on the LP. So kids, let's say they're making great progress, but they're not performing well in math or language arts, or vice versa. They're performing well on those, but they're not making progress. I think it recognizes the reality that kids are in a situation in a school where there are multiple factors impacting the overall outcomes that we get. Mm-hmm. And just to kind of throw out the idea that perhaps as we continue to evolve, we might be sensitive to that, particularly when it's going to impact what happens and what kind of support that school needs. It could be that, for example, this high-achieving school with a lot of chronic absenteeism doesn't need the same kind of support, or maybe any support at all, and that those dollars could be more directed to a school that has low performance and high chronic absenteeism to give more support for them. And just to build in some kind of nuanced understanding of what's going on at those schools and an ability to respond nimbly to that.
So I'm not sure what you mean when you say support, if you're talking about CSI and ATSI?
Yeah, those two, yeah.
Okay, so remember that your color combinations, if you're really high performing in ELA and math, the green and blue, and you're red on chronic absenteeism, you would not be identified for support for CSI. You could be identified for support for ATSI if you have a particular student group who then maybe has really high chronic absenteeism and is also not performing well. So, so then they would get identified for ATSI, and hopefully TSI at some point in the future will be able to implement that. But then, of course, the whole point of looking is providing the dashboard is then for schools to take a look at what's going on. So if a high-performing school sees that they're red on chronic absenteeism, then I would suggest that they start looking at individual student-level data, right? Are those chronically absent students, are they performing very poorly? Are they performing really highly? So really high on ELA and math. So the dashboard is meant to kind of signal to schools where they should focus some of their resources to investigate deeper. And so I would encourage schools to do that investigation and districts to do that investigation. It could turn out that, You know, we have a lot of kids who decide that they're going to take extra vacation throughout the year because it's cheaper to go to Europe in September than it is to go to Europe in July. I mean, that happens. So it is really up to the individual districts and schools to take a look and see what the impact is, what that impact is, and how they want to move forward with it. They may decide that it's not impacting their overall performance academically, and so therefore they may decide that that's not where they want to spend the resources. They have someplace else that they need to spend the resources. It's a local decision.
Thank you. And have you heard any conversation, any move to align our expectations for kindergarten students attending regularly with the law on kindergarten students' attendance, and not being mandatory? One of the feedback points that I hear oftentimes, if I go into school with, I'm concerned about the chronic absenteeism, there's a lot of concern that the school sometimes feels that they don't have any leverage with the families because it's not required that the students be in kindergarten. And so bringing those things together might be really helpful for them.
Yes, I'm not aware of any legislation that would change that.
Thank you.
We'll open it up for public comment. Are there any public comment on items?
Okay, just really quickly, I just got the information about the ETS reports. The first report was submitted. It's located in the on the state board site under memos for February 2018, and the second report is June 2018. Thank you.
Any public comment for item 4?
Good afternoon, Chair Green, members of the CPAG. Hello, my name is Jessica Sacco, and I am with Children Now and the California STEM Network. I'd like to start off by expressing our appreciation and being very encouraged by the movement towards and forward progress on a growth model. That is something that Children Now has long advocated in favor of, and we're pleased to see that this is on the work plan. In addition, we're also pleased to see that the work plan includes a reconsideration on the LP performance standard, as we believe it is currently too low to lead to EL reclassification within 5 to 7 years. We heard the next couple of comments I'm going to make are sort of relative and are going to end up wading into the waters around that weighting of indicators that you heard presented today. And I would just add that we would be very welcome in engaging in conversations about weighting of indicators, as we recognize and appreciate that as we add things to the dashboard, this does have an impact in that area, so we're fully aware of that needing to be attended to. Yet we still would like to recommend that staff add to the 2020 work plan reconsideration about the high school chronic absent rates. Right now, 16.4% of high school students are chronically absent. When we look at our foster youth, that jumps up to 43%. Of high school foster youth are chronically absent. At minimum, we'd like to see it being done around, for our alternative education schools, as many as 611 have a 50% or higher chronic absent rate at our alternative ed schools. And finally, I'm asking for CAST on the dashboard. I submitted a letter and I gave copies to Sarah. Ideally in 2021, we'd like to see a status only in 2020. There's precedence for status only. We've seen it in 2017 with the CCI, right now with the LP. We think that there's room on the dashboard for the CAST as a status only with a full measure in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, good afternoon, CPAG members. My name is Savannah Campbell, and I'm here on behalf of Ed Voice. We're an advocacy group that advocates for educational equity here in California, and we're a member of the Equity Coalition with Liz. And I'm here today because Ed Voice and our Alliance of Advocates support CPAG's ongoing work to establish an academic growth model that serves a coherent and data-driven system of local, state, and federal accountability. I think in particular we support CPAG moving forward with this residual gains model, especially in the context of our system of support. And today we urge that CPAG ensure that a student level growth data derived from this model be published to parents and stakeholders,
via the dashboard as soon as possible alongside that status indicator. And we want it published for all years available. So multi-year student level data would give schools, districts, and stakeholders powerful information regarding the efficacy of LCAP actions over the last 3 years. I'd also like to support or voice our support for including the cast on the dashboard. We think we're having important conversations about this chronic absenteeism rate, especially for high schoolers. And we also support this review of LP methodology. So thank you guys for all your work. And I'll turn it over to.
Thank you.
Hello again, Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I want to echo the statements made by my colleagues from Children Now and Ed Voice. All three of us were representatives on the state's stakeholder group for the student growth model, and it was a confounding experience. And your deliberation and recommendations to the board will be really important. Also, I think I want to lift up the idea of adding new metrics to the career indicators. I think your questions are really in the right direction about, who initiates the program. I think all getting to the question of quality of program and rigor for career readiness. I think all those things are very important and obviously very different, looking for different students and different types of schools. So it will be a challenge, but know that the Equity Coalition has been concerned about consistency and rigor in all career courses and preparations. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Is there any more discussion for item 4 from the members?
Just one additional question. Member Kaminsky kind of made me think about it, and it's an exploratory question that is, as she was giving the example of chronic absenteeism, it reminded me of an article that I read this morning about a small rural school that has seen chronic absenteeism rates go down, apparently because they instituted a wraparound service, health medicine, health clinic site, I think at the school site. And it made me wonder if we've given any thought to the idea of being able to create a query function for us to be able to look at changes that have been used as part of continuous improvement for schools that have seen the kind of increases that we would like to replicate or at least study further. So in that case, it could be a school that has seen advancements in certain areas because we're aware that one of the changes they instituted as part of their commitment to continuous improvement was to institute a wraparound, health clinic, for example, so that so we have just a better sense of how we might look to some of this data. Cindy earlier was saying this, there was a snapshot where you could look regionally at how you might compare regionally, but beyond that, it would, I think, be very efficient if we had a better sense of the kinds of changes that have been instituted at sites that have seen growth or changes in their dashboards as well. And I think it would be a very difficult task, but one that maybe we should consider.
Thank you. Okay. Jorge, following up on that, one of the things that the CCEE has are a variety of the professional learning networks that each are supposed to come up with recommendations and observations of what's been learned. And that might be a really nice place to get some of that information, kind of the narrative around it, but also maybe some of the data of the schools or districts that were really effective, and have that be a repository for folks.
Other questions or comments for discussion? Okay. Thank you so much, Jenny. This will conclude item 4. Our last item is item 6, general public comment. Is there any general public comment that comment is invited on any matter not included in the printed agenda? Any general public comment? Seeing none, that's all for item 6. And we will first thank you to all the department staff and all the CPAG members and SBE staff, and we'll adjourn the meeting at 1:35.